Nothing to fear. Katie Marie 999. Summary. Growing Up Haddock Story 6. After a trip to a foreign tribe, a deadly disease begins spreading around Burke at an alarming rate, and it's up to Hiccup and his and Astrid's daughter to find the cure before people start dying. Meanwhile, Astrid remains home to act as chief but soon falls victim to the disease, leaving her and Hiccup's son a lot more responsibility. Chapter 1, Away from Home. Chapter text. This is Burke. As Vikings, we have a strong sense of community because we all have to rely on each other. It's reassuring to have neighbors to depend on and lend a helping hand in times of trouble. However, not everyone has an easy time of trusting one another. For some, trust doesn't come naturally. For others, it has been broken so many times, they become wary of who to trust and who to avoid. No matter what the reason, betrayed confidence is never taken lightly. Unfortunately, we all will betray someone's trust at some point. And though we can pay them back and beg for second chances, we can only pray that they will come to forgive us. The young man smiled sweetly and cupped Darcia's chin in his hand. You are the most beautiful, kind-hearted, special woman I have ever met. Darcia blushed, the urge to look down at her shoes fleeting. I don't try to be. That's the beauty of it though, isn't it? Bryant smiled. It's natural. You couldn't fake it if you tried. And that's what makes you amazing, perfect. A laugh escaped her as she tried to look away from his firm gaze. Why are you being so sweet? Bryant shrugged. It's the truth. His brown eyes glanced down for but a moment until he lifted her chin and carefully leaned forward. Darcia froze, entranced by the feel of his breath ghosting her lips before. Creak. Adriana Miracle Haddock jumped on the couch, nearly dropping her book. She scowled at losing her spot on the page when her mother and Binnen walked inside from the cold, talking and laughing between themselves. Snowflakes flurried around them as the outside wind gusted through the house. The fire even crackled at the sharp contrast. Adriana quickly pulled her toes up under legs to conserve the warmth and scanned the page to continue that quite lovely scene before she was so suddenly interrupted. The 13-year-old did her absolute best to hide her annoyance and ignore the adults' conversation still raucously going on behind her. Honestly, Binnen Astrid Horferson Haddock was saying. You don't have to be so sweet. I could have carried it by myself. Binnen, a close elderly friend of the Haddocks, set the basket of groceries on the kitchen table before waving his hand dismissively. Nonsense. Someone has to be the man around here with yours gone. Astrid sighed. I can't wait until they're back. It's too quiet without my boys. Boring. She considered Binnen for a moment before smiling. The sound of Hiccup's prosthetic fills the house when he's here. It's become a comforting sound more than I ever would have expected. Binnen nodded. Ah, even terrible things can become sweet over time. Any idea when they'll be home? His last note came in yesterday. Establishing the Bobs into our system is easier said than done, but their chief Kamikaze is confident her people will come around. If there's anything Hiccup loves doing more than flying, it's persuading people that dragons are good. He said they'll hopefully be home in about a week, but it could be longer. Good. How's Finn? A smile spread across Astrid's face at the mention of her son. Just that morning she'd been making him some new clothes. Fearless Finn Haddock's constant growth spurt didn't seem to be ending anytime soon. Surely his clothes would be bursting at the seams by the time he got home. Again. Hiccup said he's really enjoying himself, meeting a lot of people and learning a thing or two about diplomacy. Well, Astrid scratched her chin idly. I'm sure he's not enjoying that part, but I doubt he's complaining. I wouldn't think so, Binnen chuckled. Do you think he's grown more? No doubt about it. He'll be taller than Hiccup by his next birthday, I'm sure of it. He's already almost as tall as me. Astrid shook her head as if she couldn't wrap her mind around it. My little man was never supposed to actually become a man. Binnen laughed again, making her smile. He turned toward the couch to stare at the back of Adriana's head. Then you have that one. Binnen nodded to her. I don't think she's left the house since Eric left. Astrid sighed. Pretty much only for flights and meals. If she didn't have her books, I don't know what she'd do. Probably be bored out of her mind. I know I'm bored just watching. Benen gave her a knowing glance. Well, why don't you do something with her? Surely she won't say no. Well, given how long we've been talking about her and she has yet to notice. Astrid remarked dryly. Benen smirked and waltzed to the back of the couch. He gently tugged on Adriana's ponytail, making her lean closer to her book in slight annoyance. Stop, I'm just getting to the good part. And what might that be? Benen leaned over her shoulder and read a few lines. He made a face. No wonder Finn doesn't like to read. Adriana faced him and took in the playful expression. Fearless Finn doesn't read because Fearless Finn doesn't want to read. Content has nothing to do with the matter, she stated. The adults chuckled. She's got a point, Benen. That she does. Benen stood up, frowning for a moment when Adriana turned back to her book. Well, I suppose if you don't want the treat of the week. He turned to walk away and grinned at Astrid when he audibly heard the book close. Adriana jumped up to stand beside him, hand outstretched to accept the small package he pulled out of his satchel. But Benen paused with a look of disbelief. Good Odin's beard, girl. What? Adriana looked down at her plain outfit, touched the lily in her ponytail and ran a hand across her face. Nothing out of place or out of the ordinary. What is it? You've grown. Look, you're almost as tall as me. Benen gasped with wide blue eyes. Adriana smiled but took in her height. Yes, she had grown taller. Of course she hadn't sprouted enough to notice a big difference like her twin brother, but she could see it. And Benen paused lightly. Better be careful or the boys might start chasing after you. Why would they? Adriana looked down and quite visibly saw the reason for this statement. Oh. A blush covered her face as her mother and old friend continued to torture her with laughter. Before either could say another word, she held out her hand. Can I have my goodie now? Please? She widened her haddock green eyes pitifully, quite the contrast in color to her puce face. Benen chuckled and handed over the small paperback. Of course, Anna. The young blonde opened the package with some excitement. No matter how old she got, Benen's special goodies from the bakers would never lose their sweetness and excitement. A sweet roll with cinnamon wrapped in a napkin met her eyes and she nearly jumped happily. Thanks, Benen. You're amazing. Adriana hugged the old man around the middle, kissed his cheek and skipped to the kitchen to find a plate. Finn's missing out. Benen scoffed. Oh, I'm sure that boy is getting spoiled out of his mind. Him and Eric both, Adriana mused before taking a generous bite out of her roll. She hummed loudly and didn't try to act polite. Astrid watched almost jealously as she devoured the first half of the roll. Anna, slow down or you'll get sick. Sorry, I haven't had one in a long time, the girl apologized through a full mouth and unabashedly licked her lips clean of the creamy frosting. Adriana smiled at her mother's skull. Everyone knew Astrid had a sweet tooth that she very thankfully inherited. Now, don't be a sourpuss. I wouldn't forget the second of my two favorite girls. Benen remarked as he pulled out a second package and held it out to Astrid, who gaped at him. Benen, how much? Ah. Benen stopped her with a single finger. A gift is a gift. Free. Take it. Astrid cocked an eyebrow at him before taking the package. But before he could step away she enveloped him in a tight hug. Where would we be without you, Benen? Oh no, Benen shook his head as he hugged her back. Where would I be without all of you? Astrid pulled back with a wide smile. She didn't answer, she didn't have to. Stay for dinner. Absolutely. Perfect. I'm making stew and rolls. Astrid said as she sauntered to the kitchen. Adriana's eyes opened wide. She asked with an again full mouth, with garlic butter. Astrid eyed her daughter's terrible manners before catching the sparkle in her eyes. Just like hiccups. Oh yes, with garlic butter. Yes. Dad and Finn are missing out. Astrid and Benen laughed again, the latter ruffling her hair. So? Benen stated blankly before wiping a smudge of frosting off Adriana's lip. Do you miss Eric? Adriana raised an eyebrow. Do you miss spring? Ha. Tush. Adriana narrowed her eyes at Benen's bright, teasing expression. Instead she focused on Astrid cutting potatoes on the other side of the counter. We're just friends. I don't know why anyone acts different. Well, Binnen attempted to stop his grin. I suspect your parents were good friends for a time before they got. Don't say it. Binnen. The teenager interrupted promptly, and Binnen couldn't withhold the grin any longer. The girl's eyes narrowed to slits once again before she smiled sweetly. All right. Have your fun. But I'm going back to my book now. Binnen watched her fling her long ponytail over her shoulder and march back to the couch. Oh, it's all right, he called after her. That book will probably teach you more about love than I ever will anyway. I seriously doubt that. Astrid muttered to the carrots she was mercilessly chopping. Binnen patted her wrist. All in good time, Astrid. All in good time. Dr. Rory said warningly, eyeing the entrance. Restark was lying on the dirt on one elbow, looking murderous. She seemed barely conscious. She was there when the gas started. She must have been poisoned. Amy told them, not taking her eyes off the firearm in the Silurian's hand. You! Restark cried furiously. Okay, get in the TARDIS, both of you, the doctor said, stepping toward the blue box while keeping his eyes fixed on the lone Silurian. He put his hand in his pocket and grasped the sonic screwdriver. You did this. Restark immediately pointed the firearm directly at the doctor and fired. Doctor! Rory bolted forward, shoving the Time Lord out of the way. The blast seemed to go in slow motion from the firearm into Rory's chest. Amy felt frozen to the spot as he let out a scream and collapsed on the ground just as Restark finally succumbed to the poison. No! Eric yelped. 4 pairs of eyes immediately fixed themselves on the nearly 15-year-old boy, who was staring at the blue book in his hands with wide eyes. 3 sighs of exasperation soon followed this outburst, but Hiccup Horrendous Haddock 3 bounded out of his chair and looked over Eric's shoulder with interest. Rory's second death, that's a good one, he said enthusiastically as he scanned the page. Olaf Larsen stared at his son with a raised eyebrow. Rory, who? Finn rolled his eyes. That guy from the stupid book Dad and Anna have read 1,000 times. Both of Olaf's eyebrows were raised, now in surprise. Really? They've got you reading it too? Eric's teal eyes lit up as he recalled the utterly fascinating book that he'd been reading for the entire trip whenever he could. Yeah, and it's getting really good. Last chapter was my favorite. See, there was this Dream Lord and he put the characters in these 2 universes and made them choose between. Olaf held up a hand. I'm already lost. You, Amy's choice. I loved that one. Hiccup paused for a moment before smiling fondly. You know, that was Addie's favorite too. What was yours? Eric asked his best friend's father. The lodger. You'll get there. Hiccup patted Eric's shoulder before going back to his chair near the fire pit. Horst shook his head at the 2 readers. Okay, enough book talk before we all get hopelessly lost, he said with a chuckle. He then focused on Eric. So you and Anna have the same interests, do you? It's not, you know it's not like that. Eric's face quickly turned vermilion. Olaf leaned back in his wheeled chair, folding his hands on his lap and giving Eric a very amused look. Oh really? Finn let out a laugh. Even I see it. Can we change the subject? I'm not too keen on talking about my daughter's love life. Hiccup gave them all his most authoritative look, which he'd been working on for months without any real progress. Hey. Potential love life, then. Hiccup corrected. Suits me fine. Eric's face began to return to its original color. He sighed deeply. When will we start heading home? I'm not sure yet. Hiccup replied, looking slightly exasperated. Kamikaze's close for sure, but she's got a lot of questions and it doesn't help that she keeps trying to engage me in sword fighting in the process. Olaf chuckled at this statement. Kamikaze was definitely a piece of work. Maybe you can negotiate while attempting to stab each other. That's not dangerous at all. Hiccup deadpanned. Horst stared at his chief thoughtfully. I don't know, Hiccup. It's not a bad idea. Hiccup shrugged. In theory, no, but it's a bad idea for me. Can't risk this leg getting any worse. He gestured to the prosthetic attached to his left leg. Olaf waved his hand as if to wave away Hiccup's concern. You've been doing fine these last few years. It still hurts sometimes. Hiccup looked saddened for a moment but soon brightened up. I don't want to get into any unnecessary fighting. I've got a village to run. Let someone else have all that glory. I don't need it. Finn jumped to his feet. I'll fight her. Hiccup gazed at his tall, muscular son. The boy certainly looked like he could take on a woman Kamikaze's size in any kind of duel. The more Finn grew older, the more it seemed like Stoic the Vast lived once more. His thick, red hair grew so fast, his mother had to cut it once a week, and even that was almost futile as it seemed to grow in all directions as well. His voice, which had started changing not long before, was right in the middle of the awkward stage, but when he spoke in the lower voice he was now acquiring without it cracking horribly, his grandfather's booming voice emerged from his vocal cords. Hiccup shook his head and laughed a bit at the boy's suggestion. It's good that you're showing initiative, but she's the best sword fighter on this side of the archipelago. You'd be pummeled for sure. Finn suddenly looked indignant. I would not. Yes you would. Horst added. You need more practice. Finn sat back down and crossed his arms across his chest. Always with the practicing. Before anyone could give Finn cliché advice about how practicing would only improve his skills, the door to the guest house Kamikaze had reserved for them burst open and a snow-covered, bundled-up Snotlout stomped in. He quickly shut the door behind him before any more snow got into the house. It's freezing, he griped at no one in particular. I hate this place. At least Berk isn't as windy when it's negative 20 degrees. Hiccup snorted. Tell me, Snotlout, do you feel submerged in this frigid weather? Yeah. Finn added with a cackle. At least you had your coat to shield you from the wind. Everyone burst out laughing. Snotlout glared at the lot of them. I hate you all, he grumbled as he hung his coat on the hook. No you don't. Hiccup said between guffaws. We make your life interesting. Snotlout certainly had a good reason to scowl at the laughing men in front of him. As they had arrived at the island of the Bog Burglars, he had been bragging about how he could win in a fight against any of the members of the foreign tribe, since most of the warriors were women. As he did so, he hopped on the edge of the ship and walked around, pointing his sword at various people and cutting random, unimportant objects that were within his reach. He showed quite a few excellent moves but, unfortunately, not quite as excellent balance. The ship lurched and the burly man immediately toppled off the edge with a high-pitched yelp of surprise, his balance thrown off by the heavy shield in his other hand. Hook Fang, who had been helping the other dragons thaw the ice around the ship so that it would move despite the ocean being frozen over, hesitated before finally leaning over and plucking the freezing cold and completely soaked Snotlout out of the water. The laughter that followed wasn't merely from the hooligans. The Bog Burglars, who had gathered to greet the hooligans as they docked, had also witnessed the incident. Snotlout had been given dry clothes and plenty of time in front of the fire, so he suffered no ill effects. Kamikaze, on the other hand, burst out laughing every single time she'd seen him the entire duration of the trip thus far. Snotlout waited until his fellow hooligans were finished laughing before turning to look at Finn, who was clearly in charge of cooking the fish and vegetables over the fire. He smirked. So Finn's cooking again, is he? He asked as he sauntered over and sat down. He's very good at it. Hiccup patted the boy's shoulder. My son the chef. Finn rolled his eyes as the laughter was now directed at him. He had discovered a talent for cooking fairly recently and was now called upon to do most of it while staying on the foreign island since no one else had the knack for it that he had. That better not leave this house, he huffed. What, that my son can feed people decent food? Hiccup asked with a shrug. Yes. Finn said through his teeth. Oh, I'm sure your future wife will appreciate it all the times she births your children and she can't do anything. Hiccup chortled. Finn's face suddenly turned as red as his hair. Dad. Eric's distinct laugh became quite audible over the others at this outburst. Olaf rounded on him. Don't you laugh, mister. It could apply to you too. One day he patted his son's knee. Eric rolled his eyes. I don't cook. Neither do I. Finn winked at the fellow teenager. No funny business now. Hiccup stated quite seriously. That's my baby we're talking about. And what about me? Finn asked in mock offense. I'll let your mother deal with it. Hiccup replied, rubbing his hands together. I wash my hands of you and your scandalous cooking trays. Uproarious laughter followed this statement. As Finn finally finished the stew he was making, he began to pass out bowls, offering the ladle to each Viking in turn. Eric was the last to be served because he was busy frowning at Hiccup. Don't make assumptions about stuff like that, he said as calmly as he could. Who knows what the future has for us? Everyone. Olaf piped up immediately. At least concerning yours and Miss Haddock's. Don't I know it? Hiccup grumbled. He didn't like thinking about his daughter growing up and bringing home boys. He'd put up a bit of a fuss when he had found Astrid adjusting one of her old bras so it would fit their daughter. It had seemed like yesterday that he had been rocking her to sleep or chasing her around the house on his hands and knees. Eric rolled his eyes in response to Olaf's comment. Whatever gave you guys these assumptions to begin with? You were holding hands when she was 3. Finn shook his head with a smile. You started early, man. I thought I was the macho one. What? You've been best friends for 10 years. Hiccup added. Really? Eric hadn't bothered to count, but it certainly hadn't felt like it had been 10 years. But now that he did the math in his head, he was shocked to realize that Hiccup was right. Horst let out a booming laugh at his apprentice's embarrassment. And then you stare at her every time she walks by the shop. Can't get you to focus. That's not true. Eric yelped. Mostly. Snotlout snorted in amusement. I am surprised they haven't kissed yet. No, shouted Hiccup. Oh, Hiccup, you've got to be ready for that. Olaf told him sympathetically. She's 13. She's still a kid. Hiccup sighed deeply. Though honestly, I still feel like a kid. Hate to break it to you, Dad. Finn began. No, really. I don't feel old. Hiccup insisted. It will catch up to you fast. Olaf told him. Horst's eyes flitted to the prosthetic. Unfortunately, you are facing some effects already and you aren't that old. Well, that's different. Hiccup crossed his bad leg over his good one. Not age, just being an amputee. What was it like? Waking up without a leg, I mean. Eric's eyes immediately turned away and he looked rather embarrassed at asking such a personal question. It's fine, Eric. It was a long time ago. Hiccup assured him. Actually, I want to know too. What was it like? Finn asked with interest. Hiccup was silent for a while, gently patting his sleeping dragon's snout. Toothless had snuggled next to his hip after he had sat down. Different. Strange. But I accepted it quickly. Why? Finn scooted closer. Weren't you mad? Hiccup shrugged. Mad? Not really. A bit sad. Definitely. I went through a grieving process of sorts. But there was no sense in being angry about it. I couldn't get it back, just like Toothless can't get his fin back. He rubbed the Night Fury's head and scratched behind the ears. But I helped Toothless fly again after permanently injuring him. And he helped me walk again after saving me. I was alive and I had my best friend. I had nothing to gripe about in the end. He suddenly sculled. At least for the summer. That first winter, man, that was bad. And your big growth spurt. Snotlout added helpfully. I remember you were out for the count for a while. That was really, really bad. Hiccup cringed at the memory. Why? Asked Finn. Think about it, your brain is telling your body to grow but some of it is missing. Hiccup explained. What was left grew but it was beyond painful. So let that be a lesson to the both of you. He addressed both Finn and Eric. Don't lose a foot while you're still growing. Duly noted, Chief. Eric said with a nod. Horst stretched and yawned, his back making odd cracking sounds as he did so. I think it's about time I went to bed. Long day tomorrow. Tell me about it. Hiccup slowly stood up. I think it's time for us to turn in, Finn. Finn, who was most definitely a morning person, nodded and followed his father to the room they shared. Hiccup heard the others getting up and going to their respective rooms, Olaf with Eric and Horst with Snotlout. As he settled into the bed, which was comfortable enough, Hiccup felt a small ache at the memory of his bed at home. How he wished he could fall asleep snuggled up to his wife and listening to her deep breathing. He missed her and Adriana very much, but hopefully he would be seeing them soon. After all, Kamikaze would see reason. Dragons were good, they would join forces, and he'd find some way to avoid sword fighting with her. As his body finally relaxed and sleep began to overcome him, he promised himself that he would be home for Snoggletalk, which was 1 week away. Yes, he would make sure everything was cleared up until then. He finally fell asleep thinking that he was going to have to work quite a bit harder to make this a reality. But for the two most important women in his life, he could do anything. Chapter 2, The Talk. Chapter Text. Shrill, raucous laughter filled the hall at an agonizing pitch. Hiccup gritted his teeth to keep his expression neutral. Finn, however, didn't have any qualms about putting his hands over his ears on occasion. Yes, the bog burglars were quite the rowdy bunch, a rowdy bunch of females for that matter. Hiccup observed his people mingled with the bogs, everyone trying to prove themselves in either conversation or might, whether that be in arm wrestling or plans to duel after the meetings. Glancing at his son, Hiccup gently bumped his elbow into Finn's ribs. Finn glowered and sat up straighter. Hiccup stifled the bubble of laughter and focused back on the group. They'd been waiting for Kamikaze to show up for nearly 45 minutes, but that was another thing about the bogs. They showed up when they felt like it, regardless of the chosen time of arrival. Thus, Hiccup allowed Finn to sleep in a little bit longer than he normally would have. He knew Cammy would be late, so there was no point in showing up early. Today was the day Kamikaze and her council would decide whether or not to incorporate dragons into their way of life. And by extension, sign a treaty to join the allied forces of the archipelago, mainly the Hooligans, Runians and Meatheads. These three tribes had been trying for decades to join forces with the Bogs to no avail. Being the first to ever make any serious headway, Hiccup was beside himself with nerves, though he did his best not to show it. Only those who knew him best could tell. Finn could tell by the way he crossed and uncrossed his arms almost constantly, shifted his gaze around the room at a constant rate, and tapped his prosthetic against the stone floor. "Dad, relax. They are going to sign the document." Hiccup glanced down at Finn, letting his anxiousness show for a moment. He didn't respond for a long moment. "It's not just the document, buddy. It's having them as allies if something were to happen. Knowing that without a shadow of a doubt that we can trust them to cover our." A shiver ran up Hiccup's spine at that moment. Grabbing a dagger from his belt, he whipped around to clash it against another. Kamikaze stood there with a triumphant, mildly impressed smirk on her face. "Backs." Finn stared at the small, blonde female with wide eyes, while Hiccup narrowed his at her suspiciously. "What exactly are you doing?" Kamikaze laughed as shrilly as her villagers around them. "You're much harder to rob than I expected." "Rob?" Hiccup and Finn asked simultaneously. Cammy withdrew her dagger, sheathing it noisily. "Yeah. A friend dared me to steal your prosthetic without you noticing. It's a shame you were quick to notice me before I could even make a move." Hiccup also sheathed his dagger, replying with a flat expression. "I'm sure you would have been so successful." With a sigh to lower his inner defenses, he added, "I'm quicker on my feet than people give me credit for." "Foot?" Kamikaze gazed down at his peg leg with interest. "I still can't believe you lost that thing at 15. It must have been amazing." Hiccup snorted. "Yeah, amazing." Finn snickered. "Mostly I am surprised that you survived, being a guy after all. Men are wimps when it comes to serious injury. Yet here you stand in one piece. Kudos to you on that one. You're still not as awesome as me and my ladies, but you're on the right track." Finn promptly snorted at his dad's failed attempt to hide his deadpan. Hiccup quickly rebounded by replying, "Well, I'll certainly look forward to working with you in the future then. Surely I can learn a thing or two from you." "Oh please." Kamikaze waved her hand. "Your compliments are meager in comparison to the sheer magnitude of my glory." She waved her hands over her head dramatically toward the ceiling, before stifling a laugh at the Haddock's confused, weirded out expressions. Landing a punch on Hiccup's arm, she said, seriously, I'm kidding. Lighten up. And just look at you. Cammy ignored Hiccup's whining and reached forward to pinch Finn's cheeks in her hands. Oh, he's so cute, I could just keep him forever. But alas, you're a male and males don't stick around with the bogs for very long. Finn wiggled out of her tight grasp, massaging his face with his hand. But he smirked, I can't see why. They're missing out. Finn. Hiccup choked, looking away with an embarrassed smile. Sure, Kamikaze wasn't too much younger than Hiccup, but that was still quite an age gap for Finn to be hitting on. Kamikaze shot Hiccup an impressed look. Your son's got guts, I'll give him that. Then her gaze turned roguish and she jabbed a finger into Finn's stomach. Right in there. Ha 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 ha. Your face. Ow. Finn whined, rubbing the spot on his belly while Kamikaze continued to laugh. She was gorgeous and wild and tough, he found he kind of liked it. But it also frightened him a bit. At the same time, he was a bit wild himself, whoever he ended up with needed to keep up with him, after all. Kamikaze wiped her eyes presently with a loud sigh. I'm sure you haven't been poked in the belly since you were a toddler. How do you feel? Finn cocked his head in a short nod. Aside from the growing welt on my stomach, I feel great. Perfect. Now, enough chit-chat. Let's get this party started. With a swift turn on her heel, Kamikaze stuck 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled high into the crowd. The bogs instantly quieted and turned toward her to hear what she had to say. Hiccup jealously wished he could gain his people's attention that fast. Alrighty my lovely crazies, Kamikaze began. I think it's high time we stopped wasting time and put our time to good use. For decades we've been nagged and we've bragged and been nagged some more, and hey, because we could, we bragged some more. Maybe it's time for some change. I've perused through the hooligans' terms of the treaty with the Allies, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, as does the Council. From this day forward we will hereby call any one of the Allied tribes our friends. Any breaking of those terms on an island's part against us, and the treaty will be forfeited and a war will probably start, yada yada. Also, the killing of dragons will hereby be outlawed, and we will have a couple hooligan representatives stay with us, preferably single females, mind you, for some time to help us train our first dragons. Dragons are now and forever our friends, and we will not use them for combat purposes only. Have I said all the things? Kamikaze asked her council hovering behind her. The group of stiff women nodded, and she clapped her hands. Good, because all this formal talk is boring. Bring me the document. A couple men on the hooligans council stepped forward with the scroll, feather pen and inkwell. Kamikaze signed her name with a flourish and promptly landed a solid punch on Hiccup's shoulder. Ow. Oh, don't be averse, it's part of the Bog's agreement to be friends. As is this, Kamikaze faced the palm of her hand, hacked a large gob of spit into it and held it out to Hiccup, who stared at it dumbly. Finn snickered and elbowed his dad in the ribs. What? Hiccup started. Kamikaze sighed. My faith in you is already depleting. It's a spit shake. Seriously, you've never done a spit shake before? Hiccup cringed. I tend to enjoy good health, thank you very much. Because good health has anything to do with your spit and hands. Really now, don't be so dense. That's so gross. Do I seriously? Finn stepped forward. I'll do it. Hiccup nudged him away. No, you just want to hold her hand. Finn shrugged. So? Hiccup gave him the stink eye, to which Finn grinned. The hooligan chief promptly spit in his hand, paused, and finally shook hands with Kamikaze. Apparently that sealed the deal more than any document, for the Bog burglars all erupted with cheers and cups of mead slamming against the tabletops. Hiccup quickly plunged his hand into the nearest water bucket and wiped it clean as vigorously as possible. Kamikaze watched on with confusion. You know, for growing up the blacksmith's apprentice, you sure are a clean freak. I like it. It's weird and confusing and awesome at the same time. Like how Hiccup continued to wipe off his hand with precise movements as Kamikaze rambled to whoever listened about the strange yet attractiveness of how fierce bears loved sweet things, like honey and sugar. He honestly wondered how she found him strange when she herself was quite strange in so many other ways than he was. Some things, he'd never understand. Like how Finn stared at her with rapt attention. Oh no. Oh no. He'd better stop that particular crush or Thor save them all. Fearless Finn Haddock with Kamikaze the Crazy. Age difference had to be the least of the issues in that particular case. Hiccup's thoughts came to a halt when his center of balance suddenly shifted and he toppled toward the left, nearly ramming into a table. Footsteps and laughter were quickly diminishing and Hiccup didn't have to ask or be told what had happened. Sitting on the bench and trying to ignore his son's uproarious laughter, he called after Kamikaze, "You don't win the dare because I definitely noticed." Kamikaze kept on running until she had long left the hall with Hiccup Horrendous Haddock 3's prosthetic held over her head in victory. "Finn. Help your old man out?" Hiccup asked with wide green eyes. Finn smirked devilishly. "Only because this means extra one-on-one time with Kamikaze." Hiccup blanched while his son began to march toward the hall door with purpose. In that moment, he sorely wished he had his other leg. If he'd had his other leg, Kamikaze never would have been dared to steal it. If she hadn't been dared to steal it, she wouldn't have actually stolen it and run into the far reaches of her village with it. And thus, if he had his other leg, Hiccup wouldn't be watching his son march after her with absolute purpose to find it. "Oh gods help us all. Mom." Adriana called timidly from the back door. "I'm in here." Astrid called as she sat on the couch mending more of Finn's clothes. "Right where I was 2 minutes ago," she mumbled as shook her head. That girl could be so scatterbrained that she'd forget her head if it wasn't attached. As she sewed, Astrid listened and counted the footsteps drawing nearer through the kitchen towards her. Yet, they seemed to stop short. Maternal curiosity engaged, she glanced up, and as she took in the sight of her daughter, she slowly put down the shirt she was mending. Adriana stood stiffly at the other side of the room, her arms close to her sides and keeping her shirt pulled down with her legs locked together, but what concerned Astrid the most was her daughter's pale face and her bright eyes wide with fear. She had gone to use the outhouse, but it looked like she'd seen a ghost on the way there. Or something. "What's wrong?" The girl hesitated before answering, in a very soft voice, "I need new laundry." Astrid's eyebrows furrowed. She looked her daughter up and down. "Why? Your clothes look clean to me." "Well." Adriana looked mortified, "They're not exactly clean, underneath." It took Astrid several seconds to figure out what Adriana was talking about. Her eyes widened. She was honestly surprised this hadn't happened sooner, come to think of it. "Oh, well, let me go upstairs and grab something to help with that," she acknowledged before practically flying up the stairs and opening the one dresser drawer that Hiccup wouldn't even touch. It was a long time before Finn had chased down Kamikaze and wrestled Hiccup's foot out of her grasp. And it took even longer to get back to Hiccup so that he could return it without being attacked by the Bog Burglars chief. But after the laughter had subsided and Kamikaze finally allowed Hiccup to keep his limb, both Hiccup and Finn had had enough of the Bog Burglars for the day. And so they immediately retreated from the Great Hall. As they braved the frigid winter weather side by side, Hiccup wrapped his left arm around his son's shoulders. Surprised by the touch, the teen glanced up to his father in awkward confusion. Why are you being so affectionate?" Finn asked, raising an eyebrow. "Affectionate? Do you have something against a father's embrace?" Hiccup squeezed the redhead's shoulder as he smiled down. "Actually, I was planning on having a father-son talk with you during this trip and put it off way too long." "But, we have talked," said Finn suspiciously. "Not about this. You're becoming a man now, Finn, and with that comes some changes." The teen stopped abruptly and turned to better face his father. "Whoa, hey now," he put up his hands defensively, "we already talked about that stuff." Finn extended his arms trying to push the subject as far away from him as possible. "I know my body's changing so we don't have to go into that again." "No, not that talk." Hiccup shuddered. "I agree, telling you everything the first time was awkward enough." He patted the boy's shoulder. "But there are more changes than just physical ones. Why don't we find a good place to sit down, preferably out of the cold? Then we can talk." He began to scan the village square for a good location. Finn ignored the last part. Truthfully, he was focused on something else. "What other changes are there?" the teen asked with a frown. He had a feeling this was going to be every bit as uncomfortable as the first talk. Hiccup ruffled his son's hair as they walked. Girls. It hurts. Adriana wailed, her hands on her abdomen. Nobody told me it was going to hurt. The tea's almost ready, Adri. Just hang in there. Astrid crushed some herbs and expertly mixed them into the hot water. Years of practice had made her something of an expert at this. You're going to be really irregular for a while and with varying degrees of discomfort, but make sure you have these herbs on hand. Why does it hurt? The girl slumped over on the couch and moaned. Why is being a woman so uncomfortable? Maybe the gods have it out for us. Astrid handed her daughter a cup of tea which, thankfully, had a rather pleasant taste. But you get used to it. Really, as long as you drink this when you start to feel it coming on, it's not too difficult to deal with. That's comforting. Adriana said irritably before taking a sip of the tea. I'll be sure to remember that as I lie here imploding. Don't be so melodramatic. Just keep drinking your tea. Astrid felt a sudden surge of amusement for some reason. And I guess this means I'm going to have to talk to you about boys now. Hiccup would have been proud to see the way their daughter reacted. Although Astrid probably should have waited until Adriana had swallowed the generous sip of tea she'd sipped because it was suddenly dribbling down her chin as she coughed. Rather than swallowing her mouthful, she had promptly inhaled it. Astrid waited for her to stop hacking before continuing. Why would you tell me that? Finn remarked, absolutely horrified. His scarlet face was buried in his hands. He was wrong. This talk was even more embarrassing than the first. Was that really necessary? Absolutely and unfortunately. Finn, this is all a natural process and we have to be sensitive to the needs of the women in our lives during this time. Well, their time. Hiccup patted his son's back. But I agree, it's not pleasant. I had no idea girls had it so rough. The teen shook his head as if trying to cast out this new information. Hiccup put a hand on Finn's shoulder. Oh, no. There's more. If only Astrid could have seen the horrified expression cross their son's face. We really don't have to talk about this, Mom. Adriana choked. I'm not. I mean, most boys are annoying. I don't need to know any more about them than I already know. Actually you do. Astrid got down on her knees in front of the couch so she could look her daughter in the eye. Because boys can be tricky. Tricky how? Adriana bit her lip. She wasn't liking where this was going, but at least the tea was taking effect. At your age, boys are also going through a lot of changes. I'm not going to go into the physical ones, you already know about the changing voice, and everything else that happens really isn't important right now. However, they also go through a lot of mental changes, and that's where a lot of girls get confused. Oh really? Adriana raised an eyebrow. Usually they just pretend to beat each other up. Astrid laughed. Yeah, they do a lot of dumb things at that age. But my point is, you need to save yourself for the right guy. And I don't mean just physically. There are guys out there who break hearts and are completely okay with it. And how do I know if a guy is the wrong guy? Adriana asked, finally starting to see the point to this discussion. Well, the wrong guy won't make you feel like you're worth his time. He'll force you to do things you don't want to do. Astrid finally sat down on the couch next to her daughter. The right guy will make you feel special. He'll make you feel loved. So wait for him. I promise you, it'll be worth it. Adriana mulled this information over for a few seconds. I think I understand. Good. Astrid patted her on the back. Go ahead and finish your book. Oh, one more thing she added. Make sure you don't fly unless you feel up to it. I know from experience that flying with cramps is not pleasant. Adriana's hand made its way to her abdomen as a wave of discomfort overcame it for a second. Trust me, flying is the last thing on my mind right now. She took another sip of tea. Nice chat, she said quickly before grabbing her book and running from the room. So what am I supposed to do about it? Finn looked up to his father, scared at the answer to his question. Do I even want to know? Well, first of all, if you see anything, hear anything, don't say it. Nothing. Don't even look at it. Just be very, very nice. Act like a gentleman. For instance, your mother and sister may talk about cinnamon. Hiccup smiled. Your mom seems to like that herb. I'm not quite sure why, but it always makes her feel better. His face fell. But this is going to be rough on Addie when it happens to her, so you have to be delicate. She's probably going to be more emotional and more irritable. Is that even possible? Finn deadpanned. Because she's already a basket case. I'm still not sure we're related. Trust me, I was there. You're related. Hiccup chuckled. It won't be easy. Your sister is going to seem a lot more weak and dainty than she used to be. Don't make fun of her for that. Don't expect her or force her to become tougher like you. You need to remember that she is becoming a young lady like you are becoming a young man. If you act properly. Women are precious. Not all are delicate, but all need to be respected, listened to and cared for in their own way. Hiccup paused as he repositioned in his seat, but it's not just girls who go through emotional changes like this. Oh, no. Finn buried his head in his hands. Not this again. Hiccup continued. I'm not going to go over the physical stuff because you know all that. I know too much of the physical stuff. The teen wailed, waving his arms about him. However, Hiccup pulled out the word, trying to regain his son's attention. As your body is changing, it begins to mess with your mind. It'll affect the way you behave, how you look at things, how you look at people. For instance, I've noticed you starting to look at some of the girls. What? No. Hiccup smiled at Finn's immediate denial, and the boy's voice cracking on the second word. No, I don't. It's okay, Finn. He put a hand on the young man's shoulder. That's normal. You're getting to the age when guys see girls differently. Yeah, I think we discussed that already. Finn deadpanned. How he longed for this conversation to end. When guys become interested in girls. And that's fine, but it's also dangerous. Hiccup sighed. Look, okay, this is kind of difficult to talk about, and I can tell you aren't going to be like I was when I was going through this phase, but you're going to start being tempted to push boundaries with women. And I'm not saying you shouldn't figure a few things out on your own. But there are some boundaries that shouldn't be pushed. Boundaries? Finn asked, somewhat curious despite himself. Hiccup continued. I don't want you to shy away from having girlfriends. No, wait, friends that are girls. Plural. Not having many girlfriends, that would be. Hiccup looked to Finn, who just stared at him. I want you to have a girlfriend. I want you to be friends with girls and not be afraid of women. But you need to respect them. Some cultures see them as inferior. We hooligans don't. And I don't want to see you or ever hear of you treating them like they are lesser. We're different, definitely, but we're equal. We each have a different role to play, but the role we play is just as important as the other. Okay. Finn sighed. What does this have to do with me? Finn Hiccup put both hands on his son's shoulders and looked him straight in the eyes. Do not force your way, or your wants on women. You will become a strong man, I can tell, but your momentary desires and the power you hold with your intimidating stature does not allow you to use women, mistreat them, and push yourself upon them. Do you understand me? The redhead nodded. Yes, Dad. As he stared into Finn's intensely blue eyes, Hiccup could only hope and pray that the issue would never resurface. As he leaned back in the chair, and observed how much his little boy had grown, fatherly pride and love swelled within him. He couldn't help but smile. Moments later, he ruffled his son's vibrant red hair, which caused Finn to duck and smile. Come on, let's go. So, what does this mean? Benen's voice sounded slightly timid as he buttoned his shirt back up. Mara, Burke's healer, sighed deeply. Nothing if you're careful. Don't overexert yourself and be sure to eat right. But at your age, it might be a good idea to get your affairs in order just in case. Benen smiled weakly. I am glad I have the time to think about such things. Thank you, Mara, for telling me. But please do me one favor. Yes. I'd like to wait until after Snoggletalk to tell anyone. The elderly man stood from the chair and headed toward the door. But I shall heed your advice. You have been so good to me these last 6 years. I really do appreciate what you've done. I haven't done anything, really. Just my job. You're the one who has made a difference here. Mara smiled back at him. Please keep yourself alive as long as you can. Binnen laughed. I'm 66 years old. I make no promises. But I will give it my best effort. After thanking the healer again, the amiable and peaceful elderly man headed home. Genuinely thankful for the time he'd had on Burke rather than the limited time remaining, Binnen couldn't help but smile. He took a deep breath of the crisp air and thanked the gods for these years of freedom and for the close friends he had made in what had become the happiest time of his life. Chapter 3, Home Sweet Home. Chapter text. Finn wasn't the only person who was sad to leave the Bog Burglars at the end of the week. With the treaty signed and the terms of the alliance discussed down to the last agonizingly boring detail, it was finally time for the hooligans to fly home and hopefully surprise everyone by being home for Snoggletalk. But it was clear that the Bog Burglars had rather liked having the Burkians around, if not just for their own entertainment. Kamikaze in particular seemed most disappointed. "You will be coming back, won't you?" she asked as they prepared their dragons for the long flight home. They'd be leaving the ships on the Bog Burglar Island. "You're not so bad, you know. For men, of course. You're not so bad, yours Rumpf." Finn began before he was elbowed in the ribs by his sheepish-looking father. "Oh, I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again," Hiccup said in a rather loud voice so his son wouldn't attempt to interrupt. "But not too soon. You are bringing us single women to help us train, aren't you? Men don't usually last so long here. I mean, the ones we have now will probably head for the hills any day now." "They all do." Kamikaze shrugged. "I can't see why." Finn winked at the Bog Burglar chief and ducked before his father could smack him on the shoulder to shut him up. "This has been the best 2 weeks of my life." "Oh, you are too adorable." Kamikaze laughed. "But you." She turned to Hiccup. "It's a good thing you're married because those green eyes are pulling me in." Those green eyes widened and became a sharp contrast to the bright red blush on their owner's face. Finn sighed heavily. He just had to inherit his mother's eyes instead of his father's. "We should probably get a move on," said Snotlout as he secured his last items onto his dragon. "We're already going to be back really late tonight. Now you should stay. You're the best kind of entertainment." Kamikaze continued to chuckle long after a furiously blushing Snotlout turned back to his dragon. "It has been a pleasure working with you. And I don't usually say that. Especially to men, of all people." She spat on her hand and extended it to Hiccup. The hooligan chief made a face but did the same and shook her hand. He immediately wiped his hand off on his shirt as Finn rolled his eyes. What he wouldn't give for an opportunity like that. "Well, you should be on your way. Goodbye then." Kamikaze immediately jumped back and waved. Are you forgetting something?" Hiccup narrowed his eyes and held out his other hand. "I don't know what you're talking about," the Bog Burglar chief said unconvincingly. "I think you do. Give it back." Hiccup wiggled his fingers impatiently. "That was going to be a gift for my daughter." "Oh, fine." Kamikaze grabbed a small book out of her pocket and placed it in Hiccup's hand. "I can't imagine why she'd want this." "Neither can I." Finn mumbled as he tied a few more things onto Tornado. "She's a special girl," Hiccup said proudly, immediately pocketing the little book. "Perhaps you'll meet her one day." "I hope so." Kamikaze exclaimed excitedly. "You wouldn't like her," Finn said, turning back to face the female chief. "She's not your kind of Viking. No stealth. And couldn't steal a sweet from a baby if her life depended on it." "Finn." Hiccup turned and glared at his son. The teenager turned back to his dragon. "She is a bit different," piped up Eric, who hadn't been paying much attention until Adriana had been brought up. "But she really is something else." "So she takes after you, does she?" Kamikaze patted her still spit-covered hand on Hiccup's cheek, making him recoil slightly. "Yes, she does." Hiccup took several steps back and placed a hand on Toothless' snout. "And I should really be getting home to her and Astrid." Yes, mustn't keep the Haddock women waiting," Kamikaze said cheerfully. Hiccup decided not to comment on the fact that the Bog Burglars seemed to thrive on making everyone wait, but he held back. He smiled as he mounted the Night Fury, who hadn't taken a liking to Kamikaze, for whatever reason. It's been great meeting you. Really. Hiccup hoped he didn't come off as sarcastic since this really was a lot better than some of his time on other foreign islands. And I look forward to working with you in the future. Kamikaze and the rest of the bog burglars waved as a dozen dragons ascended into the sky and soon disappeared. Reading wasn't a favorite activity among most Vikings. Some considered it a waste of time. Others simply didn't want to put any effort into attempting to figure out the complexities of a story or the inner struggles of fictional characters. But the youngest members of Berk, those have yet to learn to read, enjoyed the experience of reading immensely because of Adriana Haddock. The girl got a group of children together each week to read a story and then talk about it afterward. At first, only the youngest Injaman children showed up to these meetings, but word quickly spread about her funny voices and tendency to have some of the children act out the stories. These meetings now packed the library and filled the room with lots of laughter, some of it from Matilda, the librarian. It was on days like this that Adriana felt like she had the most fun and important job in the world, and even considered offering to watch some of the kids while their parents were out. Perhaps she could make a job out of it. But once those sessions ended, Adriana left her magical haven with her books under her arm and her head lowered, trying to not draw attention to herself as she walked home. The adults were quite friendly to her when they walked by, but it wasn't the adults she was avoiding. Her peers often hung around the village square and sometimes they liked to bother her as she left the library. Adriana longed for the days when most of her peers would simply leave her alone. But those were the good old days before former outcast Dana Sanders moved to Berk and began to rule the 11 through 15-year-old group of girls. The Haddock teen wasn't sure why Dana was the leader of this growing gang. She wasn't the biggest or the oldest. Perhaps it was because she was the most outspoken of the girls. Growing up on Outcast Island tended to make a person to grow backbone and learn to easily overpower and subdue a crowd. Whatever the reason, there was one thing for certain: Dana did not like Adriana at all. The Haddock girl came quite close to escaping from the girl's cruelty on that day. But it almost seemed like Dana had a strategy, because she appeared to have waited until Adriana's back was to them before speaking. "You know, it's a good thing the chief isn't here," she began. Her stentorian voice was loud enough to carry. "I think things run a lot more smoothly with him gone. Maybe he should just stay with the bog burglars. I hear Kamikaze the Crazy is great company." Adriana gritted her teeth and ignored them as best she could. "I bet Kamikaze would be able to produce a strong daughter, someone like her. Then again, bad eggs can happen to anyone." Dana continued in a carrying whisper. "If Kamikaze's daughter got captured by some psychopath, she'd get her back within the hour." "Well, she wouldn't just cry about it," said an older girl Adriana didn't know well. "She'd get up and do something. At least I had somebody to cry over my absence." "No tears will be shed for you," Adriana said through gritted teeth, knowing full well that she would regret these words. "And my dad didn't just cry about it. He came for me. But no one will be there for you." Dana approached the Haddock halfway. "There you go again. The whole world revolves around you." "That's not true." "Nah, she's actually kinda right, Dana. Her dad's been ignoring her a lot more. He didn't take her on his trip this time," Morgan pointed out. "Actually, a lot of stuff's gotten done the last few years." This struck a chord with Adriana. It wasn't that Hiccup was any less affectionate, but he was, especially in the last few years, somewhat inattentive. She hadn't noticed it happening at first, but it happened more and more now. And apparently, she wasn't being too sensitive. "He's just got a lot of work to do." Adriana turned around in the hopes that she could walk home uninterrupted again. "Maybe he just doesn't like talking about a bunch of silly fantasies that'll never really happen," Dana called as Adriana began to walk away. The girl paid no heed to her comment. Sanders spun back to her posse. "This is way too easy," she said as she turned back to her friends. "She always reacts." "Well, I would too if my dad stopped paying attention to me." Taryn's brown eyes flitted toward the retreating back of the Haddock girl. "Maybe we should just leave her alone." "Why?" "Because we got what we wanted." The chief stopped acting like she's the center of the universe. Taryn shook her head. "And clearly it's a sore spot." "Good," said an older girl named Audra. "She needs to get used to it." Taryn bit her lip as a feeling of intense guilt washed over her for a split second. But she didn't let it take control as she turned her back to Adriana and participated in the eventual change in discussion topic. Meanwhile, a lonely teenage girl was left wondering if her father really had stopped caring after all. Toothless rumbled low in his throat, jerking Hiccup awake with a sharp beat of his wings. He gasped in shock, checking himself so he wouldn't fall out of his saddle. Then again, they were attached by his prosthetic so he wouldn't fall off. Gods, he was exhausted. His back creaked awkwardly when he bent over Toothless' head. "What is it, bud?" Toothless gestured his head forward. Hiccup's chapped lips broke into a smile at what he saw. "Oh. Home." The chief twisted in his saddle, his stiff limbs voicing their complaints in the process. Most of the council members were also half asleep. Finn and Eric were definitely out for the count. Only Olaf seemed to be wide awake, smiling up at the early morning stars winking down upon them. "PSD." Hiccup whispered, catching Olaf's attention. The Night Fury rider motioned his head toward Burke and the Larson Patriarch gave him a solid thumbs up in response. Olaf turned his Gronkle steadily toward Charger, carefully nudging his son awake. It wouldn't do to fall off a landing dragon. Hiccup also made his way toward Finn, who was properly slumped over in his saddle. With a mild chuckle, he shook the teen awake. "We're landing soon, buddy." "Almost there." Finn slowly sat up with a distinct whine, soon rubbing his gloved hands together to return some feeling to them. Hiccup copied his movements, rubbing his ungloved fingers together. His palms were covered in leather while the slots for his fingers were latched onto the back of his gloves. Had he remembered to unlatch the finger slots a few hours prior, then perhaps his fingers wouldn't be so numb now. By the time Hiccup twisted in his saddle again, everyone was awake. Hiccup gave the silent order to land, asking Toothless to touch down as silently as he could. They didn't want to wake up all of Burke on the eve of Snoggletalk. After all, nobody wanted to be grouchy for the day's celebrations. As the group pulled out of their dives, they broke apart to fly to their various homes. Hiccup shot a quick salute to Olaf and Eric before he led Finn back to their house outside the village. Toothless and Tornado landed with growled sighs of exhaustion. Finn slid off of the blue Thunderdrum with a grunt, hopping up and down a bit to return some of the feeling in his toes. He began to pull the bags and saddle off his dragon's back when Hiccup slid off of Toothless and instantly yelped in pain, pulling his left leg off the ground. "You okay?" Finn asked instantly, clearing his throat in annoyance at the sound of it cracking. Hiccup set his leg back down with a quiet hiss between his teeth. "Yeah. Stump's just really cold." Finn mentally sighed. Since the duel with Ali the Insincere, chiefess of the Outcasts almost 3 years ago, his father's leg had been more sensitive to things like the cold or bad weather. The redhead honestly wished he could help ease some of the pain, but like everyone had said before, there was nothing to be done except to rest. Finn was proud to see the barn still in tip-top shape as he and his father walked inside. It wasn't massive but it had been a nice addition. That summer, Hiccup and Finn had built the barn as their own little man project, while the two women of the house got to expand the washroom for their frilly things, which Finn found to be absolutely ludicrous. The barn, however, now that was practically a necessity. It was nice for the dragons to sleep inside during the cold seasons and stormy weather at any rate. Stormfly and Lily nearly bowled the 4 over when they walked in, giving all their boys kisses until the cold air from outside began to chap their skin. Okay. Hiccup laughed, pushing against Stormfly's snout to calm her down. "Easy girl, you'll give us hypothermia with all that slobber." Finn tossed his saddle onto his bench, eyes flitting to Hiccup's left leg as he limped over to his own workbench. "Do you want me to heat some water?" he asked, rather hopeful that this time his father would say yes. Hiccup glanced over at him in surprise before he caught on. "Oh. No, I'm okay bud. I'm going to bed and it'll warm up soon. Thank you though." "Okay." Finn looked away unsure. Hiccup faced him with a loving smile. "Really, buddy?" "I'm okay." Hiccup tousled his son's hair playfully and Finn pulled away with a half-annoyed look. Hiccup laughed and wrapped an arm around Finn's shoulders as they trudged back into the cold. The dragons, snug in their warm hay beds, fell fast asleep. The house was dark and quiet when they entered, only the simmering glow in the fire pit providing little light. "Good night," Finn whispered before walking up the stairs as quietly as he could. "Sleep well, Finn." Hiccup reciprocated as he took off his coat and gloves. He hung them up beside Astrid's jacket, the back of his fingers brushing against the soft fur. He smiled, happy to finally be home after being gone for 2 full weeks, especially glad that they were home in time for Snoggletalk. As quietly as a man with a peg leg could, he trekked up the wooden stairs. He paused, looking at his daughter's closed door for a moment before he decided he'd just see her in the morning. He didn't want to accidentally wake her up. Instead, he turned and silently crept into the master bedroom. Clothed in darkness, Hiccup could barely make out a single thing in the room. He waited to let his eyes adjust before he moved. Gently, he slipped off his boot and changed into more comfortable clothes. He lifted his pant leg to feel his left leg and winced at the heat of his fingers against the chill of his stump. Maybe he should heat up some water. No, then he'd be wide awake and never sleep. And he'd have to go back downstairs and would probably end up making noise that would wake up the whole house. Nope, he'd just have to deal with it. Hiccup turned toward the bed, smiling when he saw the outline of Astrid sleeping under a heavy mound of furs. Kneeling on the bed to quietly unbuckle and set down his prosthetic, Hiccup then crawled under the furs and slid beside his sleeping wife, careful not to wake her. He slowly wrapped his arms around her, reveling in the body heat trapped under the furs. Deeply inhaling, Hiccup pressed his lips to the back of her neck and closed his eyes. "Your lips are cold," Astrid murmured. Hiccup cracked his eyes open, smirking. He could just mumble an apology and go to sleep, but where was the fun in that? "Are you going to warm them up?" she snorted, snuggling deeper into the furs. "And leave my sweet cocoon of warmth?" "I think not." Propping his head on his elbow, Hiccup brushed his chilled fingertips across her collarbone. Astrid shivered against her will. "You'll be even warmer once I am. 2 warm bodies are better than 1. His wife rolled onto her back to face him, a very unamused expression plastered onto her face. "No. Come on, you know you want to." Hiccup didn't wait for her response and buried his face into her exposed neck. Astrid yelped from the cold but relaxed when he sighed in contentment. He slid his hands under her back, spreading his fingers out so her body heat could thaw the frozen digits. Astrid tried to huff yet couldn't help but giggle. She pushed her fingers into his hair, her palms pressing over his ears. If she had any light, she knew they were probably about as red as cherries. Mrs. Haddock reached down and pulled the furs over his long frame. Hiccup sighed comfortably as the warmth washed over him. "I missed you," he mumbled from her neck. She began to rub her palms up and down his back. His skin was just too cold. "I missed you too. I think you need a warmer coat." "Perfect timing. Odin's on his way." Astrid hummed, wishing she had thought of that as a gift idea before now. But she could always save some money and make him one by next winter. At that moment, Astrid felt an icy block by her right leg. She moved and realized what it was with horror. "Hiccup, your leg." No, don't get up." Hiccup whined, but Astrid forced him to sit up and pull up his pant leg. His breath hitched when the heat of her hands connected with the icy chill of his stump. "How long was the flight?" Astrid asked as she slowly began to rub heat back into the severed limb. "About 7 hours." Hiccup sighed. "We meant to leave around noon so we'd be home by nightfall, but, well, the Bobs aren't known for their timeliness. They don't care if they are supposed to be somewhere at a certain time. Or in this case, us." "Wow, you're actually making some progress there." Astrid rolled her eyes. "You should have warmed some water." Finn offered, but you didn't want to take care of it, I know. Honestly, I just wanted to go to bed and see you." Hiccup cocked his head to look her in the eye. His wife glared up at him, not stopping her hands. "It won't matter if you end up lame for the rest of your life because you didn't." "I'd go lame for you." Hiccup interrupted with a shrug. Astrid huffed. "I'd prefer you didn't." "It's fine. I'll take it easy tomorrow. In fact, I won't even go to the Snoggletalk party until later if that will make you feel better." "Well, define later." "You're the chief." You can't be too late. I mean, I won't be there for the setup preparations. I'll go at the same time as you. Astrid finally released his stump, rubbing her now chilly fingers together. She allowed him to take her hands and blow hot air from his mouth into them. Actually, that won't work. Adri and I are coming, a little late. Late? Why? It's a surprise. Astrid winked. You know I have a love-hate relationship with surprises. It's Snoggletog. You know you're going to like it. But I know you're going to love it. That caught Hiccup's interest. Really? How so? His wife waggled her eyebrows at him flirtatiously. Wouldn't you like to know? Nah, I wouldn't. That's why I asked after all. Well, good, because I'm not telling you. Astrid laughed at her husband's deadpan expression. Anyway, how did it go? Hiccup brightened instantly, the grip on her hands tightening. Perfect. They signed. Oh good. Yes. We officially, finally, have the bog burglars as our allies. Even if nothing ever happens and we don't need them for help, we've expanded our way of life with dragons to one more village. After Snoggletog we'll be sending a couple women over to help train. Kamikaze insisted on women. It's exciting. Cammy's really happy with how things have turned out. But. She leaned closer at his unsure expression. But. Finn has a thing for Kamikaze. Astrid snorted loudly. Honestly. I'm not all that surprised. Finn's a wild boy himself. It makes sense for him to fall for women who are just as wild as he is. Hiccup shook his head firmly. I don't care who he ends up with in the end, just please don't let it be someone as wild as Kamikaze. She's that'd be just. Eesh. She snickered, scooting closer to fix the braids behind his right ear. So? Adri has changed while you were gone. Changed? He stiffened. Changed how? The Haddock matriarch smiled mysteriously. Oh, she got her first visit from an old lady's friend. Lady's friend? What? Who? Astrid rolled her eyes. Apparently her husband hadn't listened to the entire sentence. No, not a man, or a person for that matter. Hiccup stared at her confused when she sat back, his braids finished. But you said. It's a woman's way of saying her time of month has come. Honestly, Hiccup. Oh, well, why didn't you? Hiccup froze, eyes wide. Wait, what? The mother of his children tenderly cradled his face in her hands and slowly repeated, Adri started her first. Where are you? She wrapped her arms around his waist and pinned him to the bed. His left arm shuffled around the floor for his prosthetic. Hiccup. What are you doing? I have to go talk to her. Right now before this gets any worse. Hiccup finally managed to free himself from her grasp and find his prosthetic. You will do no such thing. She hissed. What exactly are you going to say to her? Her husband faced her with an incredulous look. Don't have sex or you will get pregnant and you will die. Astrid raised an eyebrow and tried to pull the prosthetic out of his hands. No. No, you're not. So you want me to just sit back and wait for her life to end in one foul swoop? You're acting like she's pregnant already. Don't jinx her. She huffed. I'm not jinxing anyone. This is life. And more importantly, this is womanhood. Hiccup fell onto his back with his hands covering his face. No. She's not a woman. Astrid flicked his knee impatiently. Well, she's most certainly not a man. Gee, thanks for that. I had no idea. Then stop being a wuss. She's growing up. They both are. Astrid leaned over to pull him back up into a sitting position. And it's a good thing. She shook his arms effectually. Just calm down. One day when she gets pregnant, feel free to panic, but not now. Hiccup looked morose. Don't say that. I'm so not ready for that. Neither is she. His wife replied softly. She's only 13. She's uncomfortable, her insides feel like the heat of a forge. Trust me from experience, don't make this worse by approaching her about it. Don't treat her different either. She's changing, but she doesn't need you to treat her like a fragile teacup. Hiccup sighed heavily. I know, I was just telling Finn about that the other day, but honestly, they were just babies. And now they both have the capability to have their own. He buried his face in his hands, roughly rubbing at his tired eyes. Time goes so fast. Yeah, it does. Hiccup looked up with wide eyes suddenly. Addie's best friend is a boy. Openly laughing, Astrid pointed a finger vaguely toward the village. Eric. Seriously? You're worried Eric is going to? Oh come on. Everyone sees it. Don't act like you don't. I see the beginnings of something potential. I don't see him getting her pregnant anytime soon. Eric would sooner chop off his own. Astrid. Foot. I was going to say foot. Sure you were. Hiccup shivered at that particular train of thought. Astrid snorted. You're such a boy. 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 I am a man. A big strong man. Hiccup lifted his arms and flexed for emphasis. This only caused Astrid to laugh. Right. Because that's why I married you. For your strength. In a way, yes. You did. Hiccup smirked, his expression flirtatious. Which reminds me, you have yet to welcome your husband home with a kiss. Astrid set her hands on his knees, leaning forward. A smile tugged the corners of her lips as she brushed her nose along the edge of his, breath tickling his lips. The look of elation on Hiccup's face was priceless as his eyes fluttered to a close and he began to close the gap between them. Then she abruptly pulled away with a fake yawn before crawling back to her side of the bed. What? He asked, dumbfounded. I'm tired. Good night. His wife shot him a cruel grin before she started to wrap herself up in furs and blankets. Hiccup nearly growled, oh, I don't think so. Astrid yelped when her husband grabbed her by the calf and dragged her down the bed towards him. She squirmed and tried to kick away, but his grip on her leg tightened. Hiccup began to press warm kisses up her leg, the stubble on his chin making her laugh and struggle more. Hold still, woman. He hissed at her knee. She shot him a daring glare. Why don't you make me, Viking? Hiccup's eyes narrowed in a challenging sort of way. As he began to move closer, Astrid suddenly twisted around and tried to get off the bed. He barely managed to clamp his arm around her waist and pull her back into his lap. She used the momentum to shove him onto his back, ignoring his wheeze of surprise when she used her full weight to sit on his chest. I win. She hissed triumphantly. Hiccup's piercing gaze never left. Did you? His hands found her waist and dug into the flesh below her ribs. Astrid jerked and thrashed above him, trying her hardest not to scream with laughter and wake the kids down the hall. His wife scrambled away and Hiccup sat up again. He retracted his hands to grab her face and pull her in for a kiss. Astrid didn't waste any time, biting his lip and nudging his mouth open with her tongue. Hiccup moaned in surprise when she practically plundered his mouth and firmly pressed her hands against his chest. He growled when she tried to shove him back down onto the furs. Pulling her back onto his lap and wrapping his arms around her waist, Hiccup pressed sloppy warm kisses down her neck and onto her collarbone. Astrid fisted her hands in his hair, pulling him impossibly closer. Her breath hitched when her husband sucked hard on the skin below her collarbone. Hiccup. That better not be visible tomorrow. He smiled roguishly at her. Why would it be? It's not like you to wear scandalous clothes. Well, he grinned at her smugly. Not out there at least. Shut up. Astrid kissed him again, shoving her hands up his shirt to feel the heat of his skin. Hiccup moaned, pushing her backwards until her back hit the pillows. He hovered over her long enough to pull his nightshirt off before meeting her lips again. He always loved the feel of her hands roaming his back while he kissed her senseless. Goosebumps prickled up his skin when her fingernails scraped down his spine. Hiccup bit his lip to keep back the moan when she pressed hot kisses down the jagged scar on his neck. She carefully kissed the scar over his heart and then pulled herself back up to eye level. She met his eyes for a moment before she focused on his chin. He smiled when she gingerly kissed the scar there, then whispered, almost missed one. Hiccup pressed his forehead to hers, brushing his nose up against hers and feeling her breath mingling with his own. He felt Astrid's left knee slide up against his hip bone before he heard and felt her whisper, "Kiss me." Hiccup smiled at her lovingly as he slid down to her stomach. He lifted her nightshirt enough to reveal her thin waist. Holding her hips, he gently traced his thumbs across the faded stretch marks from her pregnancy. Even after all these years, they still held a strong sense of love and fascination to him. And every time he made love to her since their babies were born, he was sure to show her just how beautiful he thought she was, starting with those very marks. Astrid hummed warmly when her husband pressed his lips against her belly and slowly dragged his mouth upwards. Hiccup traced his mouth over her ribs, carefully mapping every inch of skin it touched. He was startled when she sat up halfway but smiled when she pulled her nightshirt over her head altogether. He roguishly glanced down at her warm pajama pants in response, but Astrid dragged his face back down to her torso instead of complying with his rather obvious request. With a low whine, Hiccup began to mouth the edge of her chest band, to which she throatily replied, "Wait. Just wait." Hiccup continued to sloppily kiss his way up to her collarbone and neck, his hands traveling agonizingly slowly over her torso so that Astrid squirmed beneath him. "You are as beautiful as the day I married you," he whispered. Astrid bit her lip, hooked her leg over his hip, and flipped them so she now covered him. "So are you." She cradled his face in her hands for a moment before whispering, "Your turn." Hiccup sighed heavily as she took her sweet time in kissing down his neck and chest. It didn't matter that they'd been married for 15 years, he was still reeling with every kiss she gave. She never got old and thus he never got old. They were still young kids learning about the other in ways they never could have as mere friends. He still felt like the young man who had married the most attractive, the most dangerous woman in all of Berk, all of the archipelago, heck, in all of the world. Astrid Horferson loved him. She became Astrid Haddock, and it was certainly a miracle that she still loved him. "Astrid." Hiccup hummed as she nipped at his jaw. His hands clutched at her waist reflexively and she captured his mouth with hers again. It took all the strength in the world to be quiet, and for a moment, Hiccup didn't want to be. For once in a long time, he wanted to shout her name to the rooftops and tell the world how much he loved her. His fingertips found the edge of her pants and she breathed a giggle into his ear. "What? I love you." "What? I love you." Astrid stifled a laugh when he buried his face in her shoulder, panting hard. "One more time. I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you." Astrid giggled at his passion, a small part of her hoping his voice wasn't carrying. She pulled at the long strands of his hair and firmly pried his head back out of her shoulder. She stared down at his face heatedly, fiercely enjoying how he panted, and then whispered, "Prove it." Once again, since their first night together, Astrid was surprised at the strength and speed of which her husband could flip her onto her back with little to no resistance. Under most circumstances, she'd have been outraged, but this. Honestly, she couldn't wait until next time. Chapter 4, Hidden Darkness. Chapter text. Hiccup and Astrid didn't usually wake up at the same time most days. Hiccup liked to sleep in while Astrid enjoyed rising with the sun and getting as many things done as possible before the rest of her family joined her for the day. But holiday mornings are special and thus habits are often broken. Hiccup and Astrid, therefore, were awake as a tiny glow of light came through the window. Thankful for the warmth of each other and the heating system Hiccup had rigged throughout the whole house years before, they didn't see any reason to get up right away. Hiccup snuggled in closer to his wife, breathing deeply and taking in the wonderful scent she offered. He gently stroked the soft skin of her curves beneath the furs and hummed contentedly in her ear. "Happy Snoggletog." Astrid whispered in response. "You're a lot warmer than you were last night." "How could I not be?" Hiccup leaned in a bit more. "I wish the kids were out of the house. Then we could go again. That would be nice." Astrid stretched her arms and turned to face her husband, burrowing into the fur some more. "But they're not here now." Hiccup smiled and snuggled down with her, firmly placing his hands on her hips and drawing her close to him. She raised a hand and brushed some of his thick brown hair out of his eyes before leaning in and catching his lips with her own. Despite the warmth of the embrace, shivers ran down both of their spines as they tried to make up for the 2 weeks they had been separated. Just as they were thinking of throwing caution to the wind and repeating the previous night's activities, They heard a crashing sound and a high-pitched squeal of pain. "Someone's up," Astrid whispered into her husband's ear. "We'll have to save this for later." No." Hiccup kissed her again. "I'm not ready to get out of bed." Astrid pecked his nose before rolling over and emerging from the many furs covering her. She quickly slipped on some comfortable clothes before slipping out of the room. Hiccup watched her go with a sigh. As happy as he was at the thought of seeing his daughter again after a long 2 weeks away, he wasn't at all finished with Astrid. He suspected he wouldn't be for quite some time. Meanwhile, Adriana had tried her best to get out of bed without waking anyone, but alas, her poor cleaning skills thwarted her efforts. As she got up from the ground, her foot tangled in several shirts, Astrid opened the door a crack and peered in. "Sorry," she whispered. "I can go back to bed." "No need. Your dad's already up," Astrid replied with a wink. "I think he'd like to see you. Go on downstairs and I'll be down in a minute after I wake up your brother." Adriana grinned and pounded down the stairs without another word, her nightgown flying out behind her. Her time of the month had come to an end the previous day and she was feeling much better. Astrid walked down the hallway to the adjacent room, which contained her teenage son. Finn was buried deep into the blankets and was so out of it, his mother had to shake him several times before he was awake. Dad," he mumbled almost incoherently. "Lemme sleep." "I'm sure your dad would let you sleep too," Astrid said cheerfully. "But I'm not your father." "Mom," one of Finn's eyes slowly opened and, for a moment, he was very confused. "Yep." Astrid ruffled his hair. "Welcome home." Despite feeling more like his body was fused to the bed, Finn suddenly felt a surge of energy powerful enough to allow him to sit up and embrace his mother. She held him tightly, very happy that her little boy was home at last. Well, she thought as they broke apart and she got a good look at him, he wasn't so little anymore. His thick red hair fell all over his face and neck. She would have to cut it soon before it got out of hand. And he seemed to have grown even more since he had left. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed this since the change in height was so subtle, but Astrid could tell her boy would be taller than her in no time at all. "Nice to see you again, Mom." Finn's voice sounded a little bit lower than she'd expected, but it was a welcome change. "I missed you." Astrid nudged him with her elbow. "Now get dressed and go downstairs so you can see what Odin brought you." Finn rolled his eyes but got out of bed anyway. By the time Astrid had left Finn's room, Hiccup was dressed and had just begun to descend the staircase. Astrid smiled mischievously and threw her arms around him from the back, causing him to stagger slightly but stay upright thanks to her weight. "Can't keep your hands off me, can you?" he asked flirtatiously before turning around and kissing her firmly so that she couldn't answer right away. "Well, someone doesn't seem to mind." Astrid nibbled his lip, causing him to moan in pleasure, before descending the staircase next to him. "How could I? I have the most beautiful woman in the archipelago fawning all over me." Hiccup grinned as he received the well-deserved smack on the chest for that comment. "I'm not fawning." Astrid huffed. "I'm just making up for lost time." Well, in that case, I guess we'll have to find a place to be alone as soon as we can." Hiccup growled seductively, making her laugh. "Easy, Tiger, there are children present," she said, pointing to their daughter, who had her back to them the whole time as she surveyed the Snoggletog tree and the presents beneath. "Weren't you just telling me last night that she's a woman now?" Hiccup muttered into his wife's ear before saying in a much louder voice, "Well, aren't you going to turn around and welcome your old man home after a long and completely exhausting time away?" The girl turned around and her face broke into a smile. "Dad," she squealed excitedly before hurrying forward and throwing her arms around his neck. "Easy there, Addie." Hiccup chuckled, hugging her as tightly as he could without crushing her. "These brittle bones aren't as strong as they used to be." "Oh please." Adriana laughed as she broke away from him. "You're not that old." "Yes I am." Hiccup countered. "Apparently I am now capable of becoming a grandparent." Adriana's face immediately reddened. "Mom. Don't panic, Adri, he's not going to treat you any differently." "Right, Hiccup." Astrid poked him in the ribs with her elbow. Right," Hiccup said reluctantly. "And that's not the kind of thing I need to talk about anyway." The point is, my kids grew up way too fast. He looked back at the staircase, where a sleepy-looking Finn was now descending. Both of them. Sorry, Dad. Finn deadpanned. We'll just shrink and stay tiny forever. Except then we'll never leave the house and you and Mom won't get any alone time. Oh, we'll get alone time whether you like it or not. Astrid placed her arm around her husband's waist. No matter what size you are. What time is everyone else getting here? Adriana asked impatiently. Not too long from now. Astrid glanced at the window and was glad to see the sun higher in the sky, casting light in the house and almost making the lamps they'd lit unnecessary. Enough time to make breakfast. Oh, Finn can do that. Hiccup said immediately, pushing his son toward the kitchen area. Finn cooks. Adriana stared at her brother with a raised eyebrow. No, he grumbled. Don't be so modest. Hiccup strode forward and got some eggs out of a basket. Your brother has a gift and it's high time he shared it with the whole world. I will keep denying it until I die. Finn said with a scowl. Men don't cook. Oh yes they do. Hiccup pointed to the kitchen area. Go on, we won't tell anyone your diabolical secret if you get breakfast started right away. Adriana giggled as her brother reluctantly made his way to the kitchen area and began extracting ingredients from the cupboards. As he was just beginning to get something together, there was a knock at the door. It's open. Hiccup called. Thank goodness, said Binnen as he walked in, brushing snow off of himself. It's cold out there. You could have slept here. Astrid hurried forward and helped her elderly friend take off his coat. Thank you, but I wanted my gifts to be a surprise. Binnen grabbed a small rope and dragged in a sled with 4 wrapped gifts on top. Oh Binnen, you didn't have to. Adriana smiled widely and began to place the gifts atop the growing pile around the tree. Nonsense. Binnen said stubbornly. Of course I did. The elderly man didn't have time to explain himself anymore because Finn had finally found a good stopping place and hurried across the room to hug his dearest friend. Binnen laughed. Look at you. 2 weeks and you've grown even more. I have. Finn looked down and noticed that his pajamas were slightly tight. Well. The gap between you and your sister gets bigger every day, it seems. Hiccup grasped the twins' shoulders and put them together. The top of her head comes up to your nose. Yep. I'm just that amazing. Finn chortled before heading back to his abandoned food. Height isn't everything, mister. Adriana shouted over her shoulder before turning back to everyone else. Although it would be nice not to have everyone staring down at me. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Highness. Astrid rolled her eyes. How about we sit down so can look down at us for once? Hardy ha ha. Adriana deadpanned. Whichever one of you is responsible for my shortness, you owe me. A gust of freezing cold air hit them as the door flung open, revealing an amused-looking Gobber with a large, bulky sack at his foot. Ah, you probably haven't hit your growth spurt yet. Your dad didn't get his until he was almost 18, he added as if he had always been standing there. Thank you for reminding me of how tiny I used to be. Hiccup said flatly. I'd nearly forgotten. No problem. Gobber hobbled forward and smacked his former apprentice on the back, causing him to stumble. I'm always happy to remind your kids of the reason for their awkwardness. Adriana smiled but felt rather embarrassed at being reminded just how many of her father's genes she contained in every cell of her body. They seemed to dominate her mother's because Finn had clearly inherited Astrid's agility. But, as she looked at her dad, who finally smiled at yet another quip from his old mentor, she supposed there could be worse things than the inability to get through a walk in the woods without tripping on a fallen branch or rock. Speaking of awkwardness. Astrid began, her eyes fixed on her son. I hear Finn has a thing for the chief of the Bog Burglars. Finn dropped his mixing spoon with a clatter. It's not, she's just. It's fine, his mother chortled. Just don't use Pipsqueak or Nissa to send her love letters. Fine. I'll just get my own terror. Finn shrugged and went back to mixing the concoction in the bowl. You already are a terror. Adriana muttered. All in all, that Snoggletog morning had been one of the best. Binnen had surprised everyone by how generous he had been. He got Astrid a new axe with her name carved into the handle, Hiccup mentally kicked himself for never coming up with that. For Hiccup, he had gotten the warmest winter coat he could find. Finn had received a shiny new helmet that could be adjusted as his head grew, and his hair thickened. He had given Adriana a lovely necklace which had a pendant in the shape of a rose and decorated with little purple stones that were so carefully cut, they almost looked like actual petals. The Haddocks all protested that these gifts were far too expensive, but Binnen waved away their complaints and told them that it was worth it just to see their delighted expressions. Gobber had gotten them all weapons, 2 of which Adriana couldn't even lift. Luckily for her, she had been given the small dagger rather than the gigantic club that had gone to her brother. The rest of the gifts were exchanged, and by the end of it, the best of them had been the cloth flower hair clips Hiccup had made Adriana. He'd even put semi-precious stones in the middle, several practice axes from Astrid to Finn, a whole new set of tools for Hiccup from Astrid, and a brand new, very sturdy, and handmade saddle from Hiccup to Astrid. By the time they were clearing out the wrappings, Thorin turned up at the front door. "Finn, some of the guys are having a snowball fight. You in?" he asked breathlessly. Finn turned to his parents. "Am I in?" Hiccup smiled and patted his son on the back. "Go for it." "Yeah." Finn hopped to his feet and threw on a coat over his pajamas. Astrid had to call him back twice, once to put on a hat and the other to put on gloves. "Adri and I have to get ready for the party," Astrid said, jerking her head toward the stairs. "Already? It's in 2 hours." Hiccup called as his daughter pounded up the stairs after her mother. "Oh, let them go." Binnen chuckled at the 2 of them as they disappeared. "Women always need extra time to get ready." "Yeah. I guess." Hiccup stared at the stairs for a long time. "Alrighty, then," Gobber said loudly. "I'm going to go help set up," and he walked past Hiccup. He patted his shoulder in an almost comforting way before facing the cold outside. For a few minutes, all was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Binnen watched as Hiccup sighed deeply and turned around, staring into the fire with a faraway look in his eyes. "Forgive me for asking because I know it's not my place, but..." Binnen paused, allowing Hiccup to look up at him. "Might I ask something about Adriana that might be a bit personal?" "I think I know what you're going to ask." Hiccup leaned back against the couch. "You deserve to know anything you need to know about us. You've earned that right." Binnen lowered his eyebrows slightly in thought, trying to figure out exactly how to phrase his first and most pressing question, one he had contemplated for a long time. "Adriana's story, it didn't have such a happy beginning, did it?" Hiccup audibly swallowed and shook his head. "No, it did. She had a wonderful beginning. The pages were just stained and torn before the story could really begin." There was a long pause. "I guess, to get a perspective on what happened, did I ever tell you about the day the twins were born?" Binnen shook his head. "I've heard little things. Such as the fact that the twins weren't born here." "Yes, well, that's part of it. It's a long story of how it came to this, but Astrid gave birth on a remote island in the middle of the ocean. We didn't have a healer or, well, anyone who knew what they were doing, so we just had to pray it would go well." Hiccup took a deep breath. "Finn was born first. As soon as he was out, he started screaming so loud, we could hear it echoing all over the place." Binnen laughed. "I'm sorry. It's just very fitting." "Definitely fitting. He was always loud." Hiccup agreed with a tiny smile, which soon vanished. "We had no idea it was twins. We thought it was all over, but then Astrid started having pains again. It was surprising enough to find out there was another baby, but then Addy came out feet first." He trailed off for a moment, his gaze focused on the burning embers as his mind raced to find a way to share story and not get choked up. "I delivered her. She was 4.5 pounds and so beautiful and fragile, and silent. The little girl I always wanted was motionless in my arms. She didn't breathe, she didn't cry, she might very well have died already. I breathed into her mouth and pressed her belly countless times until my dad had to stop me. Hiccup shook his head and faltered. Binnen put a hand on his shoulder. "But then she started screaming. That's why her middle name is Miracle. At birth, she barely survived. If only that was the only thing she ever struggled through. I wish I could say it was." Binnen sighed. But it wasn't. No. No, it wasn't. Hiccup shook his head. My dad had a crazy sister who was banished for something she didn't do. Well, initially. My dad accidentally killed his baby brother. Hiccup, when he was a kid. And Trista, she was blamed for it. Then as payback she mutilated the body. Binnen gasped. She was banished. But she came back, and for revenge against my dad for causing her a life of misery, she... Hiccup stopped and swallowed hard. Gods, 10 years and I still can't. It's all right. Take your time, son. Don't rush. Hiccup licked his lips. Trista came in the middle of the night on Snoggletop and she kidnapped Addie from her bed. Binnen stiffened, his hand on Hiccup's shoulder tightening considerably. No, what did you do? He whispered. Hiccup opened his mouth but then paused for a few seconds. Hang on, let me go get something from upstairs. He rushed up the steps. Binnen heard Astrid tell him that on no uncertain terms was he allowed to check on the women's progress, and returned a few seconds later with a box in his hands. He sat down next to Binnen and placed the box between them. I know it's crazy, but I saved everything from when it happened. As much pain as it caused us, Astrid and I never want to forget what we went through, how terrified we were, we never want to forget why we fight for her. Hiccup opened the box and handed Binnen the note with the skrill at the bottom. The elderly man stared at the note as the father continued. This was the first one, this was the note that... I thought I'd never see her again. He put his head down and covered his face to keep composure. After finding the emotional strength to continue, he looked back up at his friend and explained each note and where it had led. Hiccup expressed his immense frustration when a clue brought them right back to the house after an intense and desperate day. His voice wobbled slightly when he described to Binnen the bloody skirt they discovered next morning and the search for the puzzle pieces that revealed where Trista was hiding. But it wasn't until he recounted the events after they rescued their daughter that his eyes began to mist. It's been how long, and you envision saving your baby and she runs to you, crying in your arms as you hold her tight. Hiccup licked his lips again. But she didn't. You're successful in extricating her from the jaws of death and you run to her and she just stares at you, in fact, stares at you in utter horror before she runs away from you. She chooses another parent as someone who can protect her more than you can. He shook his head. That woman tore her apart, mentally and physically. She tore our family apart from the foundations, and I've said it once, I will say it again, it is a miracle that she is here. That any of us are, really. There was a long silence as Binnen took in everything he had heard. Finally, he spoke up. Sometimes bad people do bad things to those who deserve it the least. Bad things happen to good people. But it doesn't define them. Adriana's story may not have had such a happy beginning. But she doesn't have to live in that terrible woman's shadow forever. In fact, I think slowly but surely she is getting there. But that goes for all of you. You also. Hiccup looked over and Binnen smiled gently. You were terribly affected by this. If my old ears have heard anything at all in my time here, it is that your last decade hasn't been an easy one. And that's where it all began. You don't have to live in her shadow, in fear that you can't protect those you love. You can, and you do. Every day. Hiccup shook his head. It doesn't feel like it. I've never felt more useless in my life than the time my daughter didn't want me in the same room as her. But she accepted you over time, yes. She must have, or she wouldn't love you dearly now. Binnen reminded him. Yes. She did. Hiccup took a deep shuddering breath before continuing. She's always hated to see people cry. Ever since she was a toddler. Still does, as a matter of fact. Binnen nodded. All those emotions couldn't stay down forever, and at one point, she saw me crying about it. And that. I guess she hated seeing me cry a lot more than she was frightened to come near me. Or resentful. He paused and shook his head. I honestly don't know why she ran from me. I don't know why she was frightened of me in the first place. Something about that doesn't add up. At this point, I hardly think it matters. Binnen said softly. She isn't running from you now. Hiccup put his head in his hands again. Through his fingers, he shakily continued. I still hear her cackles. My heart still pounds when I recount those days. I still grieve for my baby that never really came home. She was snatched away, and came home a different person. A very scarred, injured and terrified soul wrapped tight in that little body. She's yet to feel freedom. She will. Benen assured him. After a moment, he tentatively asked a question that was pressing in his mind but he was unsure of voicing. What was she like before it happened? Hiccup smiled suddenly in a way Benen had never seen before. It wasn't a happy smile. There was anguish behind those eyes, but at the thought of his daughter as a toddler, the father couldn't help but smile about the few carefree days she'd had. Everything made her happy. She was vibrant, excited to live. Her laugh made anyone smile. People loved to watch her chase after Finn through the village. She loved tea parties and looked hilarious and adorable sitting between massive Vikings. She could convince any of them to do a tea party with her. She hated to see anyone cry. Hiccup stopped and he finally frowned, the anguish now taking over his face. She's still in there, in the small ways when she thinks we're not looking. But most of the time, she's gone. I'm sorry. Benen said in a voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for telling me. I know it was hard. You needed to know. Should have known sooner. No, there's a time for everything. The best time is now. The smile returned to Hiccup's face at Benen's words. But I will say that many things make so much more sense now. He paused for a few seconds. And I think you're right, Hiccup. She's still in there. I can see it. You just have to give it time. Hiccup nodded. I know. She'll be back someday. I just pray that it won't take more pain to make it happen. As do I. But I know one thing for sure. Your daughter is a fighter, right from the start. Of that you should be proud. She is a true haddock. Benen said proudly. I am. Hiccup smiled. I should probably take this upstairs before anyone sees it. We keep it pretty well hidden so Addy or Finn won't stumble on it. Yes, that sounds wise. Benen agreed. Thanks again for telling me. As Hiccup ascended the staircase with the box in his hands, Benen went into deep thought about the story he just heard. The darkness behind the haddock girl's eyes now made perfect sense, but some of the pain wasn't just residual. There was new pain as well. He could see it on her face when she thought no one was looking. Adriana was a lonely, unhappy little girl at heart and no one seemed to see it. Perhaps they blamed Trista for her troubles, but that was only part of the problem. In that moment, Benen promised himself that he would try to make a difference with whatever amount of time he had left. He owed it to the family after they had accepted him as their own. And he owed it to the little girl who had done so much to make him smile even while she herself couldn't. Chapter 5, Under the Mistletoe. Chapter text. Gobber truly was a man of his word. When he'd told Hiccup that he could handle the setup of the Great Hall for the Snoggletog party, he wasn't kidding. In previous years Hiccup had organized the preparations as his father always had before him, but with this year's extra distractions and fatigue wearing the chief down, Gobber had insisted on taking over. Well, he had really outdone himself for a man with one arm, one leg and nursing a pint of mead while he worked and ordered people around. Hiccup stood impressed in the center of the great hall as Gobber helped Phlegma the Fierce hang a few more wreaths. Elder Gothi moseyed past him, nudging his shoulder with her staff and giving him a crooked smile. Hiccup nodded to her in greeting before a group of young women and their mothers nearly plowed him over. The bustling group of females tittered their apologies and followed after their mothers with haste. Hiccup chuckled at the learning girls, also eager to learn their mothers' tricks in cooking and housekeeping. This type of urgency in a woman to perfect everything in her home was something strange to him. He'd only had a mother for 6 years growing up since his father never remarried, and for as long as he'd known Astrid, she was never one for perfect living quarters. Not that she completely loved chaos within their home, but she'd surely go stir crazy if she mended, sewed and did laundry all day, every day. Those things were surely a good work, yes, but everyone was different. The smell of freshly cooked sweet rolls and buns combined with the pleasant aroma of mutton and boar and fish stews and fries nearly overcame him, and it was all he could do not to snatch a plate and start piling it high now. When the elderly women began to trickle in, each carefully holding their pots and pans full of homemade baked pies and desserts, he began to nervously fidget. He remembered one time as a little boy when his parents found him under a table with an entire pan of stolen blueberry pie. Nope, he'd never fully recovered from the experience. He wished Astrid was here, or at least Adriana, to help him keep his head on straight. One of these days, pie would be the death of him. Gobber thumped over to him and sat down with a heavy sigh. Wiping his face down with a handkerchief, he grinned up at Hiccup. "So, what do you think?" Hiccup faked concern. "I don't know, don't you think it's a little weak?" "Weak? I mean, it's still kinda dark in here, Gobber. I don't know if anyone can see the floor. Now see here, I got every single light up on those rafters without the help of a single drag." "Gobber." Hiccup interrupted with a grin and patted his shoulder. "I'm kidding. It looks great. Thanks." Gobber deflated and cuffed him on the head like he used to when Hiccup was a boy. "Yeah, you're welcome. And yes, I did use a dragon or two. I couldn't help it." Hiccup snickered. "It's fine, Gobber. I would have done the same. Gods, it's getting hot in here already. And only about a third of the village is here." Gobber smiled wide. "Oh hoo, look at the pie. Don't even get me started on pie, Gobber. Don't tempt me further." "Hiccup, you had your fill on pie yet?" Snotlout's voice erupted from the doorway as their friends and families walked through the doors. The chief rolled his eyes and opened his mouth to retort, but Tough Nut beat him to it. "Yeah, it looks like he's gained weight already. Look." Tough Nut promptly jabbed his finger into Hiccup's gut and he slapped him away. "Ow. Seriously?" Rough Nut rolled her eyes. "Please, that could have been so much worse." "Yeah. Like how?" Tough Nut taunted. "Like this." Rough Nut jammed her pointer finger right into his eye and he jumped back with a screech of indignation. Svala sighed in annoyance. "Please don't blind my husband before our baby is born." "Yes. Please don't blind my husband before it's born." "Wait." Tough Nut paused to think. Svala rolled her eyes. "Oh come on, I'm starving. Let's find a table." Tough Nut was promptly dragged off by his wife, leaving the rest of the group to laugh at their expense. They really had no room to laugh, however, as they could each remember their first experiences at having their first pregnancy, or having a wife with her first pregnancy. It was a strange, educational, exciting time for each of them, and, by all accounts, very different for all. Helga suddenly huffed in a look of boredom. To the chief, she asked, "Where's Finn?" "He's over." Hiccup turned to look around the crowd in search of his unruly mop of red hair. "Ah, he's over there with the other boys." "Cool, thanks chief." Helga shoved past Inga with a sneer and marched toward the table. Inga effortless called to her back, "Have fun. You're really perfect for each other." Hiccup eyed her quizzically at her choice of words and she made an exasperated face at him. "Really chief, you haven't noticed their goo-goo eyes yet?" "Of course, I have," Hiccup replied without missing a beat. "What's it to you though?" "Jealous." Inga chortled in laughter. "Oh heck no. No offense, chief, but Finn's a moron." Hiccup blinked once in surprise and Inga saluted him and her parents in apparent dismissal. "See you around, I'm crashing this joint." Hiccup chortled in laughter as she sashayed away and Snotlout puffed up in pride. "She is so your daughter?" "Really? You hadn't noticed before?" Heather asked with a mild chuckle. "Nah, not at all. Come on, let's go get a seat. It's starting to get crowded in here." "Sounds good, Chiefo." Snotlout wrapped an arm around both his wife and Hiccup. "Don't call me that," Hiccup smirked mischievously. "Clumsy." "Oh shut up, not that again." Snotlout whined indignantly. Heather laughed openly beside him, fully ignoring his scowl. The friends found a table with empty seats where Fishlegs and Rough Nut had sat down. Once they got comfortable in their seats, Svala and Tough Nut, both with equally mountainous-sized plates, joined them. Hiccup remained standing so if any villager needed to find him, they could see him easily. The group traded jokes and stories while Snotlout and Fishlegs got mugs of mead for everyone. After the sound of the great hall was loud enough to make your ears buzz and bodies were crammed at nearly every table, the group took their time in scanning the faces of nearby tables. Most of them scanned the area for their entourages of children, all were accounted for. That's when Tough Nut spoke up just as Hiccup was raising his mug to his lips. "Whoa Chief, you might want to turn around." Hiccup gasped involuntarily, then hacked painfully as he inhaled his mead. The sweet beverage burned the back of his nose and throat as he coughed and made his lungs constrict painfully, but he couldn't help but stare with wide green eyes at his gorgeous wife sauntering toward him from the door of the great hall. When she had told him the night previously that he would love the surprise she had planned, he had no idea what to expect. But he never would have expected this. Astrid had a firm smirk on her face as she walked toward him with all the grace of a queen. She was making him weak at the knees, and she knew it too. He didn't stop his eyes from trailing down her body to look at the dress she'd made for herself. It was a bright blue tone that made her eyes pop with a sweetheart neckline, cinched at the waist to accentuate her curves and flowed down in pleats just to the edge of her knees. Her hair was curled and stuck into a bun with a few curled, wispy tresses falling past her ears. The ensemble was perfected with a silver chain necklace he'd made for her as one of the gifts for their engagement. The end of the necklace held 2 dragon scales. Blue for a deadly nadder and black for a night fury. All in all, she was evil in torturing him in such a way in front of the entire village. In the back of his mind he could hear the snickers and whistles from their childhood friends behind him, but he kept his eyes where they were. Part of him wished she hadn't gone to such great extremes, but then again, she was Astrid Haddock, wife of the Chief of Berk. She had to make a good impression after all, or so she'd said. Usually he'd scoff that vanity would someday be her downfall, but right now, he wasn't complaining. Not at all. Astrid finally stood before him with a raised eyebrow. Hiccup scanned her dress once again before he inhaled through closed teeth and shook his head. "You surely are the fairest of them all, Mrs. Haddock." Astrid grinned fiendishly. "Oh yes, I know. Mr. Haddock." The way she said his title made his heart pound rapidly in his chest, and he seriously had to fight for control of the situation. Wouldn't do to grab his wife and drag her out of the hole in front of everyone, their own children included. Couldn't be too obvious now. Exhaling heavily and trying to look away from that long pale neckline, Hiccup gestured to the hall. "Full house already. MHM." Astrid stepped closer and heavily distracted him with the overwhelming scent of honey and mint perfume wafting to his face. She took his hand and firmly stood at his side, pressing her shoulder into the back of his arm. Hiccup scoffed and kept his eyes focused on the room and not on the beautiful Valkyrie beside him. "We're already married, no need to make such a statement in claiming me," he murmured. Astrid stroked her thumb in a slow circle through his palm. "Well, I think you already accomplished that with the red mark below my collarbone from last night." Hiccup squeaked in surprise and not so subtly looked at her neckline to make sure the dress covered the mark. Besides, what would be the point? Hiccup's breath hitched and he whispered furiously, "Astrid, stop, not now. You're not as sneaky as you used to be and are every bit as sultry. A dangerous combination if you ask me." "You're the chief." Astrid whispered in his ear. "Who'd say anything?" Hiccup felt a blush rise up the back of his neck as he looked at the floor, quickly avoiding eye contact with anyone and clearing his throat deeply. "Besides, I'm just preparing you for the real surprise when we get back home." Hiccup's eyes snapped to hers in surprise. The meaning of her words hit him full force and he swallowed thickly, wiping his free hand on the side of his pants. Her expression was very calm and seemingly blank, but the one clenched muscle in her jaw spoke volumes. She was trying so hard not to laugh. Astrid presently sighed and released his hand. "Well," she smiled at him loftily and promptly walked away. "I'm thirsty." "What, wait? You can't just." Hiccup stopped talking when he noticed the extra swing in her hips and pouted at her back. She was being so evil right now that it wasn't even funny. A distinctly male voice interrupted his inner tangent. "Well, me and the guys were going to invite you to a little after party after the party, but it's pretty clear that you'll be a trifle held up." A chorus of laughter erupted behind him and he turned on his heel to Snotlout and the other guys. Tough Nut was nodding at him in mock approval and Fishlegs was trying with much difficulty to hide his snicker in his mug. "Oh, shut up." Hiccup snatched his cup of leftover mead off the table and scowled at the contents. "Besides, You didn't even hear what she said. Yes, we did. Tough Nut slammed his cup down in excitement and Hiccup blanched. The guys burst into laughter at his look of abject horror and he felt his face grow hot. Hiccup, my man, sometimes you are so gullible. Hiccup huffed frustratedly. You're just gloating because Svala's newly pregnant. Tough Nut puffed up his chest. Why yes I am. And yes she is. Fishlegs snorted indignantly. I still hold the breaking record with 7, gents. Bow down at my feet and weep. Hiccup snorted as the men broke into hysterics again. Please, you guys can't possibly know my record. Just because there aren't any more kids doesn't mean there isn't any more action. Snotlout rolled in eyes. Yeah, go ahead and gloat. You have it easy. No worrying. No worrying. Have you met my kids? Hiccup asked incredulously. Actually I was referring to you and Astrid not having to worry about her getting pregnant. Since she can't. Snotlout bit his tongue, kicking himself for bringing it up when Hiccup's face fell. Sorry. It's fine. Hiccup perked back up. Slip of the tongue. It happens. Fishlegs jumped into the conversation to clear the awkward silence. Well, you and Astrid have 2 great kids. What more could you ask for? Hiccup smiled wide and searched for both his kids across the busy hall. Yeah. What more? He tapered off, eyes lingering on Astrid for a few moments. The guys didn't fail to notice the smile slip off his face and eyes cloud with deep sadness for a couple moments before he checked himself and the moment passed. He turned back to them a happy man again, and it was only due to their long friendships and work together that they knew he was covering up something. But none of them dared broach the topic further. Whatever he was hiding, clearly it wasn't important enough for them to know. A man's secrets were his own, after all. Tough Nut snorted loudly a beat after Hiccup turned back to them. Your daughter's dancing with her boyfriend. Hiccup rolled his eyes. My daughter doesn't have a boy. He choked on the word and whipped around to follow his friend's gaze. Sure enough, his baby girl, dressed in an equally gorgeous purple dress like her mother's, was dancing with Eric, her hands gently clasped behind his neck. The boy had his hands resting on her hips carefully, and it was all Hiccup could do to not tear across the great hall then and there. Yoo-hoo, jealous daddy's jealous. Snotlout monologued helpfully. Hiccup grit his teeth in annoyance. Your intellect astounds me, Snotlout. Snotlout slapped Hiccup's shoulder. Always. But hey, you might want to have your kids spend the night at some friends' houses tonight. Shut up. Tough Nut chortled loudly. Yeah, because anyone could tell that tonight you are going to get L. Tough Nut, seriously. Hiccup interrupted with a wild shake of his head. He seriously did not want anyone to talk about this. Curse his wife and her gorgeous curvy body and her evil, dastardly plans to make him suffer. One more thing and then I'll shut up. Hiccup spared Snotlout a warning glance before he turned away. Make her pay for it. Hiccup sputtered with wide eyes and quickly walked away. How much more awkward could things seriously get? He wondered if sitting and listening in on women talk would be less awkward. But then a chatter of laughter erupted from Astrid's table with Heather, Ruffnut and Svala, all of whom were watching him with mysterious eagle eyes, and he quickly pushed that idea aside. That's when he spotted Olaf and his wife, Lara, sitting with Benen at a table toward the dance floor. With a great sigh of relief, he hurried over to them for some sense of normalcy. Eric Larson was feeling very, very impatient. 2 weeks ago, he'd given his best friend in the world, Adriana Haddock, a big hug and promised her that he would be back. Now he was back, but he hadn't seen her all day. And not only was it Snoggletalk, which was an exciting event on its own, it was also his birthday. So his impatience was forgivable in light of these circumstances. Although his early arrival to the Snoggletalk party was a bit more logical, as he and Gustav had had to secure their father to his gronkle and walk behind him as he hovered up the stairs just in case something went wrong. And then they had to open the doors wide and allow the wheelchair-bound man in and untie his chair from the dragon before it was distracted by the food on the table. So, all things considered, Eric had waited a very long time in the chilly Great Hall before most of his fellow hooligans arrived. Girlfriend not showed up yet, Gustav teased, nudging his little brother on the arm. Shut up. Eric said with a blush. His heart leaped when he saw a small blonde head, but fell a split second later when he realized it was Helga Ingerman walking in with her parents and 6 siblings. There was still no sign of any of the Haddocks. "Oh, calm down." Olaf chortled at his son's obvious impatience. "She's coming." "I'm calm," Eric exclaimed unconvincingly, his voice cracking and ruining the effect. He cleared his throat, ignoring his brother's cackles. "I'm calm. I'm okay. It's not that important." "Sure it is." Gustav patted Eric's back. "And I'm sure she isn't at all eager to see you again." "Nope." Eric didn't hear that last part because he had finally spotted Hiccup, Benen, and Finn walking into the hall. He stood on tiptoe to see if he could see his friend, but she didn't follow them. He made a sort of whining noise in his throat and began to bounce on his toes in frustration. I guess we can cross punctual off the list of positive attributes." "Careful, Eric, don't want her to show up late for your wedding." Gustav snorted in amusement at the sight of his brother acting like he was trying to stand on a floor made out of fireworms. Rather than respond, Eric punched Gustav in the stomach. This only caused Gustav to laugh harder. Just as the oldest Larsen boy was retaliating with his own blow, Finn walked by and stopped to watch the spectacle. "So this is what I missed out on, being the only boy," he commented with a smirk. "Makes me wish I had a brother. Violence starts so early." "That it does," Olaf agreed, shaking his head. "3 boys and it's all the same. Rough housing from the time they're toddlers." "Where's Annie?" Eric blurted out, his patience finally dissipating. "Thor knows." Finn replied with an amused expression at the sight of Eric speaking to him while attempting to keep Gustav in a chokehold. "They said they'd be late." "Oh." Eric sighed in disappointment and let up slightly, allowing Gustav to escape and try to tackle him. "She'll get here, CK, stop panicking." Finn rolled his eyes. "CK?" Olaf raised an eyebrow at the boy. "Well, if he's going to have both AC and AK at the end of his name when only one is required, someone might as well find a use for them." Finn replied with a shrug. The tussle lasted only a few minutes more because Gustav spotted his son wandering in and decided that he should probably set a good example for the boy. Eric was quite grateful, for a few seconds. And then a splash of purple graced the entrance. Eric's breath caught in his throat. Standing at the door and looking very awkward was his best friend in the world, only she didn't look like the little girl who had run barefoot through the woods with him years ago. In fact, she seemed much less a girl and more, a lady. Perhaps it was the dress, which was purple and accented with a sort of soft brown, 2 colors Eric wouldn't have thought to mix. For the first time, he noticed that she was shaped like a woman, much to his embarrassment as he immediately forced his eyes upward to look at her face again. The moment she caught sight of him, she ran across the room in a rather undignified way, not that Eric minded, and threw her arms around him. "I missed you so much," she squealed excitedly. "Happy birthday and happy Snoggletog and happy homecoming and, just be happy." Eric laughed and hugged her back as tightly as he dared. She smelled so good, as if she'd only just dried off from a bath. Her friend resisted the urge to breathe in her fragrance as he held her. "I missed you too," he whispered. "I hope you weren't too bored while I was out." "Oh, I was." Adriana finally let him go and smoothed out her dress. "There is nothing to do here except read and fly. I missed my boys every second." Eric, glad for an excuse to look at her for a specific reason rather than ogle from across the room, grinned widely. "Well, it wasn't so exciting there either. But hey, I got up to the lodger in your book. It was great. Really funny. I see why your dad likes it." "Yeah, he likes the ones with the doctor inventing stuff out of all the odds and ends lying around." Adriana tucked a piece of hair behind her ear and looked rather bashful. Eric, sensing her slight discomfort, helped her tuck the stubborn piece of hair behind her ear. "You look really nice." "Do I?" Adriana looked down at her dress with a sigh. "I feel ridiculous." "Take it from me, you don't look it." Eric sighed awkwardly before looking around the room. "Want to go get food?" "I'm really hungry. I've been here for over an hour." "Yeah, that sounds nice." Adriana bashfully remained where she was standing for a few seconds before reaching out and taking his hand in hers. "Let's go." Eric only had a moment to be surprised that she had taken his hand before he was following his best friend through the thickening crowd toward the food. As they loaded their plates and sat down to catch up, Finn scanned the crowd for his peers and soon found them congregating toward the back of the room. As soon as his plate held enough food to feed a decent-sized dragon, he had gotten a lot hungrier the more he grew. He bolted over. "Miss me?" he asked, sliding in next to Thorin and facing his other friends. "Nah. We were just starting to forget you exist," said Gunnar Ingerman with a grin. "Yeah, why'd you have to ruin it now?" Thorin punched Finn's shoulder rather hard. "Very funny." Finn deadpanned. "If you want me gone all that much, I'll just go." He made a move to stand up. "Don't listen to those idiots," Helga Ingerman said as she sat down at the table before reaching out and grabbing the front of his shirt, yanking him down rather violently. "Of course we missed you." "I didn't," Inga Jorgensen commented as she passed the table with a few of her friends, who giggled. "In fact, I'm looking forward to your next trip off of Berk." "Well, I'm looking forward to you leaving." Finn knew his comeback was terrible, but he didn't have time to come up with a good one. "Oh look, we agree on something." The girl turned her head, her long black hair whipping Finn in the face, and strutted away, her giggly friends following closely. "Gods, she's obnoxious." Finn mumbled through a large bite of chicken. "You mean she doesn't worship you like all the other kids?" Gunnar rolled his eyes. "That's not why." Finn protested through his friend's laughter. "True enough. She also doesn't listen to you when you tell her to do something," Helga added. "You're a bit of a control freak." "I am not," Finn retorted, his face reddening. "You really are," said a dark-haired boy, who slid his plate next to Finn's. "And Inga's an idiot anyway." "You shouldn't talk like that about your niece, Kale." Helga frowned at the boy, who rolled his strikingly blue eyes. "Hey, what are uncles for?" Kale shrugged and took a big bite of chicken. "Besides," he added with a mouthful of boar, "I ought to know since I've lived with her for the last 4 months. Still." Helga trailed off. "If you tell me Gunnar is never an idiot, you're lying." Kale fixed a scowl on Helga from across the table. "Oh, he is. All the time." Helga laughed when Gunnar made a sound of indignation. "But I don't go around telling people that." "Whatever." Kale immediately turned to Finn. "How were the bog burglars?" "I hear they're insane." "Completely. They're almost all women too." "It was weird." Finn's cheeks reddened slightly at the thought of kamikaze, but he quickly tossed it from his mind. A strong hand wrenched his head to the side and a firm body pushed him away from Kale. "Ow. What gives, Gar?" Finn quickly evaded his eyes with a mad blush when Morgan, garbed in a busty pink dress with a swooping neckline, plopped herself between him and Kale. "Save it, Haddock. The life of the party is with the women, which means they get to call all the shots." Morgan snipped pointedly, then swiped a finger across Kale's cheek sweetly. "Hey babe." Kale grinned almost maliciously. "Hi." Finn made a point to stare at his plate and ignore the way Kale's eyes swept over Morgan like she was a piece of meat. He gulped nervously and turned to Gunnar, who seemed to be oblivious to the awkward situation going on at the other end of the table. Helga, however, also seemed to be avoiding anything and everything there and was staring at him pensively. In that instant, Finn thanked the gods that Helga had the decency to wear modest clothing. Kale finally snapped out of his trance and snorted at the younger kids, Finn especially. "Come on, Haddock, relax. I could teach you a few things if you loosened up a bit." Finn coughed and scratched the back of his neck. "I'm sure you could. You're hesitant, I get it. One day you'll loosen up, and when that day comes." Kale shot a scandalous wink at Helga that made Finn's blood curdle. "Call me." "Come on, Helga." Finn sighed heavily. "Let's go get some punch." "Gladly." Helga jumped up, nearly shoving Thorin's head into his bowl of stew when she used his head as a crutch. "So like her mother." Kale laughed heartily when they walked away, his nose buried in Morgan's long blonde tresses. "Fine, but you're missing out on some fine education." Once they were out of earshot, Helga shivered. "Ah, that guy gives me the willies." "He's not bad, not until Morgan comes around anyway. Then he's kinda vocal. Obvious." Needing to make an appointment with the tailor. Helga. Finn squeaked, his voice cracking painfully. Sometimes he could curse the fact that her mother was rough nut because occasionally she had absolutely no filter. Is this what it was like for my parents to grow up with your mother? And my uncle, oh, and Snotlout and my dad. Well yeah, but your dad would sooner chop off his own hand if someone had him say something weird. Helga scoffed, trust me, my dad says plenty of weird things. Finn shook his head, and I'm confident that there is more than one definition for weird. And that, my good friend, is where my father's genetics come into play. Finn laughed heartily. Yeah, okay, you win. Helga gasped. What? The infamous fearless Finn Haddock is deferring. Oh, someday write down the date. Why? Finn stopped in his tracks with a look of confusion. Why would we write down the date? It's Snoggletalk, we could just remember it. Helga twirled a long blonde curl around her finger. Oh, and now he's giving me extra tips to help me remember it. Who needs Kale to teach you anything when you've got the talent already? Finn stared at her in stricken confusion and she giggled goofily, me loving some haddock. Finn squeaked in shock and she punched his shoulder. Oh come on, lighten up. Gee, Kale does have something right in his too gorgeous noggin. Helga sauntered toward the drink stand, leaving Finn to stand gobsmacked and confused. Yeah, he was convinced, women were strange creatures that he'd never understand. Music seemed to start out of nowhere. It was funny how something as simple as a few musicians plucking or blowing into oddly shaped instruments could change the tone of the party so abruptly. One moment, couples were snuggling or talking to each other from all over the hall. The next, most of them pulled tables and chairs out of the way to make room for the dancing. And, as usual, the dancing grew more lively as the music got louder. Soon the hall was filled with laughter and men twirling their wives, fiancés, or girlfriends around in circles. It was as if a spell had been cast over the entire population of Berk. Finn watched the dancers with an amused expression before he felt someone poking his arm. What? Want to dance? Asked Helga, nodding to the middle of the floor and putting the drink she'd just gotten down on the closest table. What? Finn sputtered in surprise. Do you want to dance? Helga slowly repeated as if she was talking to a toddler. Oh, I mean, Finn scratched the back of his head, his face turning bright red. Well. Sure. Finn squeaked, his voice cracking horribly. I mean sure, whatever. Helga grabbed his hand and yanked him to his feet before pulling him onto the dance floor. Finn stumbled a few times before straightening up and praying that no one had witnessed this horribly awkward moment. He'd never hear the end of it. Meanwhile, Adriana and Eric were sitting back and simply watching the crowd of people moving to the music, some more coordinated than others. It's so sweet. Adriana sighed. What is? Eric asked, turning to her and raising an eyebrow. The way your parents still dance with each other. Adriana rested her cheek on her hand and watched the Larsons dance with a big grin on her face. It doesn't matter that your dad can't walk, they still find a way. Yeah. Eric smiled fondly. Yeah, they do. True love always finds a way around everything. Adriana watched her best friend's parents for a few seconds before nudging her friend on the shoulder. Do you want to dance? Me? No. Eric's cheeks reddened considerably. Adriana's face fell. Well, if you don't want to. No. I mean yes. Yes, I do. Eric's blush deepened at the near-accidental rejection of his best friend. The two teenagers got on their feet and sauntered onto the edge of the dance floor. As many times as Eric had hugged Adriana, he still felt awkward placing one of his hands on her hip. He had only danced once before when his sister out randomly decided he needed to learn, so he was feeling quite nervous. Adriana had danced with Hiccup a few times, but this felt completely different. Where she and her father had made a show of hopping all over the room and twirling as much as possible, this wasn't the same thing. This was new. Both Eric and Adriana had a pretty good sense of rhythm, so as they began to sway to the music, they felt several eyes on them, some from adults who gave the young couple a very knowing smile. Is this okay? Eric asked in a low voice. I mean, are you, comfortable? Adriana suggested. Absolutely. You're not bad. I'm not. Eric laughed shakily. I'm out of practice. Well, I was never really in practice, truth be told. It's okay, I'm not much of a dancer either. You're doing splendidly. Adriana playfully squeezed his hand, causing his smile to widen. I know I kind of said this already. Eric leaned in and whispered in her ear, but you look beautiful. And you look quite handsome. Adriana whispered back with a wink. Or maybe that's just because I missed you so much. That would make more sense. Eric quipped. I don't look any different. I never said you weren't handsome all the time. Adriana muttered so softly he almost didn't hear her. At this, Eric's blush became far more prominent and he didn't seem to know what to say next, so he remained silent. The two of them listened to the music and continued to dance, both of them just beginning to feel very comfortable in the movements and with each other. In fact, something seemed to be happening as Adriana and Eric crossed the dance floor, their eyes fixed on each other. Butterflies fluttered through the Haddock girl's stomach as she moved to the music. Eric's touch was gentle, but it didn't seem to come from the impression that she was fragile. Rather, it was loving, tender, as if she was something valuable to be handled with care. As if he wanted to make sure she remained safe, her beauty untainted. To him, she was worth more than the rarest of jewels or the finest embroidery in the archipelago. Soon, both his hands made their way down to her waist and he brought her closer to him. She hooked her hands around his neck and leaned in, allowing their foreheads to touch as the music steadily continued. She could feel his warm breath on her face, his lips coming tantalizingly close, his hair tickling her forehead ever so slightly. The song that had been casting the spell over the young couple ended far too soon, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Eric and Adriana didn't move, they merely stood and waited for the next song. A familiar Snoggletog carol soon filled the hall and the couples around them continued to dance. So distracted were they with each other, it took Eric and Adriana a few seconds to realize that they could continue dancing. As they moved, Adriana heard something by her ear, a soft voice singing along with the carol. Her smile widened. It was a very pleasant tenor voice, so soft it was almost inaudible and yet perfectly on key. I didn't know you sang, she finally muttered to him. Eric stopped mid-syllable and the pink tinge returned to his cheeks. He coughed once and went completely silent. Oh no, don't stop. Adriana shook her head the tiniest bit. I liked it. I don't usually sing in front of people. Eric breathed a laugh. I didn't even notice I was doing it. You have a really nice voice. Adriana whispered in his ear. It's a shame you don't share it. Eric shrugged and became silent. A few seconds later, a gentle, soprano voice began to fill his ears. He stared at Adriana with wide eyes. She winked at him and continued to sing perfectly on key. After he recovered from the shock of having such an angelic sound emanating from so close to him, he began to sing along with her in a simple harmony. Their voices mingled together and seemed to create a beautiful sound all its own. The young couple smiled as they sang, their voices slowly growing louder so that those around them could enjoy the soft music they created together. When the Snoggletog carol ended, they both sighed contentedly. Do you want to keep dancing or, I guess, watch for a bit? Eric asked his best friend. Let's sit the next song out. Adriana's heart fluttered when Eric took her hand and led her to the edge of the room. The next song was lively, causing everyone in the room to hop around and twirl and, all in all, look awfully silly. Eric and Adriana laughed at the antics of some of their friends, of Snotlout and Heather dancing so wildly others would step out of their way, of Tuffnut and Svala going out of their way to bump into them and laughing when they stumbled, of Finn nearly tripping over his own feet as he danced with Helga, and of Ruffnut holding a sprig of mistletoe over Hiccup and Astrid's heads. Adriana's parents glanced mischievously at each other for a second before they kissed so passionately, there were several cheers. Hiccup, enjoying the attention he was receiving, dipped his wife, causing her to make a tiny squeak of surprise, and finally broke apart, their eyes fixed on each other. Astrid laughed as he helped her stand again before running to the tables to subject another couple to the powers of the mistletoe. Why do people kiss under the mistletoe? Eric mumbled to himself. Adriana, who hadn't realized his question was rhetorical, decided to speak up. I think it's romantic no matter how it started. Eric looked over at her and smiled. I didn't say it wasn't. But what about mistletoe is so special? Or kissing, for that matter? Adriana's eyebrows raised. You've never kissed anyone, her cheeks reddened when she realized how that had sounded. I mean I haven't either but. I just sort of thought since you're 15 now. No, I haven't. Eric shook his head. I mean, who would? Adriana breathed a laugh and averted her eyes. It's okay, I didn't mean to, sorry. No, it's all right. Eric said calmly. I know what you meant. For a moment, there was absolute silence between them as they watched the dancing continue. And then, almost as one, they both looked at each other, and looked up. High in the rafters of the hall was a single sprig of mistletoe directly above their heads. Slowly, very slowly, their heads lowered and bright green eyes met smooth teal. Adriana's hands began to fidget nervously. Larger, calloused hands soon closed over them. Eric leaned in a bit so that their foreheads were touching. His heart was drumming against his ribcage and he could hear Adriana's doing the same. He tried to stare into her eyes but his eyes flicked once, twice to her pink lips. Adriana stared back at him almost patiently and he could feel the warmth rise to his cheeks for what felt like the 100th time that night. Before he made a conscious decision, he felt his lips ghost over hers, then he froze. Adriana's eyes were also half-lidded and he expected her to back away, but she surprised him with a smile. Gently resting her fingers against his jaw, she pulled his mouth the rest of the way to meet her own. Eric's breath hitched in his throat as his eyes finally closed. He dared not to move for fear of destroying this moment forever. He couldn't help but think that her lips fit so perfectly against his. Every detail suddenly logged into his memory of their own accord, her head tilted just to the right, her eyelashes gently tickling his cheeks, the softness of her hand against his jaw. Instinct seemed to take over and he leaned closer to her, deepening the kiss ever so slightly. Adriana inhaled sharply in surprise and suddenly felt Eric's fingertips brushing through her bangs toward her ear. Her heart continued to pound in her chest at this new experience, something she'd never thought in all of her life that she'd do, kiss her best friend. Eric reluctantly pulled away, instantly wishing he could wrap his mouth around hers deeper, more passionately, but he couldn't do that. He reveled in her breath still ghosting over his lips and he took his time in opening his eyes. A part of him was amused to see her just opening her eyes as well. He suddenly realized his fingers were still lightly threaded into her hair and her hand had slid to his shoulder. And the sound of someone's laughter broke through the sweet barrier they'd created. Eric glanced over to see Gustav snickering with a few adults, his older brother giving him a wise look of approval. Eric blushed madly and snapped his head back to Adriana, though he quietly cleared his throat and couldn't meet her eyes. Finally he felt the need to say something. Well, that was... wow. Amazing. The best thing he'd ever done. So many thoughts flew through his mind and he couldn't decide which was the best and wisest to say. But Adriana shrugged gently, nervously answering for him, nice. Yeah, it was. Eric froze and finally looked into her eyes. Yeah. Yeah. Adriana looked toward her boots and bit her lip subconsciously. Eric flushed again at taking notice of that and sorely wished she hadn't done it. Because now he just wanted to kiss her again. No. It was just for the mistletoe. He couldn't kiss her again, especially since Gustav and so many other people had noticed. Oh gods, what if Hiccup had seen that? And now Adriana was looking back up at him with innocent green eyes that brought warmth to her pale skin and light pink lips. Oh gods, what had he done? He'd never think about her the same again after tonight. Never. But, that wasn't a bad thing, was it? He snapped out of his reverie when he realized Adriana looked kind of awkward through his long pause, probably waiting for some response. Eric still couldn't think of anything to say so he merely smiled wide. Yeah. Dimples. Adriana loved his dimples, she always had. And whenever she saw them on his face, she knew without a shadow of a doubt that he was happy. Seeing them now, seeing him so happy after that. She wanted to kiss him again, it made her so happy to see him happy. But no, she couldn't do that. That was just for the mistletoe. If her daddy didn't come over and skin Eric alive the first time, he'd surely do it the second time. Sprig of mistletoe in hand, Hiccup ran through the sea of tables with his wife just behind him. Their eyes fell on Heather and Snotlout at the same time and, with identical mischievous grins, they immediately bounded over. Hiccup weaseled his way through several burly men to stand behind the Jorgensen couple with a triumphant smirk. They looked at him in confusion but saw the mistletoe before either could get a good look at him. Snotlout gave a mock sigh. "Dang it. I just hate this part of the party." Heather growled roguishly. "Oh, shut up and kiss me, idiot." The twin Jorgensen boys shrieked in disgust and promptly ran away when their parents began to almost ferociously kiss. Hiccup and Astrid laughed at the boys' terror. Hiccup cleared his throat after a few moments, starting to feel a little awkward himself with Snotlout and Heather's making out directly in front of him. Snotlout merely held out a hand for him to hand over the mistletoe. Hiccup dropped the plant in his hand and grabbed Astrid's. "That's our cue." Snotlout and Heather broke apart with equally giddy laughter. "Oh, sit down and stay a while," Heather chirped cheerfully. "We could use the company," her grunkle growled indignantly. "Oh hush, you know what I meant." Heather patted the dragon on the head with an amused smile. Toothless, who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere from behind the table, rumbled at Hook Fang. The monstrous nightmare promptly growled back and the dragons proceeded to have a conversation only they understood. Their humans watched them for a while before Hiccup and Astrid finally decided to take Heather's advice and sit down. Olaf and Benen, who had been talking to each other one table over, decided to join them as well. "Well, I think we can consider this one of the best Snoggletalk parties we've ever had," Olaf said with a smile as he leaned against the back of his chair. "Yeah, it's been great." Hiccup's eyes scanned the crowd and he beamed as he watched all of his people enjoying themselves. "Perfect day to come home, I'd say," agreed said Astrid, leaning over and kissing him on the cheek. "We all missed our boys. Some more than others," Benen stated, nodding to Eric and Adriana, who were in an opposite corner. Hiccup stiffened. "What are they doing?" "Talking, looks like." Astrid shrugged and patted her husband's shoulder. "Stop panicking." "Yes, but they are standing really close together." Hiccup leaned forward as if this would help him get a better view of the couple. A few dancers immediately blocked Adriana and Eric from their sight for a few seconds. The hooligan chief straightened up, trying to see over their heads to no avail. When the group finally danced away from their vision, Hiccup got the perfect view of his daughter and her best friend connected at the lips, her hand caressing the Larson boy's jaw and his gently threading his fingers through her hair. The girl's father choked on thin air and stood up so quickly, he nearly made himself dizzy. "I'm going to kill him," he bellowed in a voice that was, thankfully, drowned out by the music. Benen timidly grasped his arm and tried to keep him from bolting over and putting a stop to his daughter and Eric's moment. Astrid immediately grabbed his collar and the two of them successfully yanked him back down. Hiccup finally went limp in their arms, his eyes fixed on his daughter and glaring daggers at the boy who was still standing far too close to her. "How dare he, with my daughter?" Hiccup sputtered indignantly. "Oh hush." Astrid let go of his collar and began to rub his back. "Remember what you're always telling the twins, share." "I never told her to share spit." Hiccup growled, crossing his arms in front of his chest. "You, Hiccup, they're not even look, they've already pulled apart." Astrid pointed to the couple with an exasperated sigh. "Lucky for him, or else I'd tear him to shreds." Hiccup grumbled. He suddenly stiffened again. "Oh gods, his fingers are still in her hair." "Oh, relax." Astrid punched him on the shoulder with her other hand. "We did worse things at that age." "We weren't even talking at that age." Hiccup shouted, causing her to wince at the sudden noise. "True. But we were doing worse when we were talking." Astrid winked at him. Hiccup sighed and rolled his eyes. "You make us sound so chaste." Everyone around them laughed out loud, causing Hiccup to scowl and tighten his crossed arms. "Well, you can relax," Olaf said serenely. "As you can now see, my son's fingers are out of your daughter's hair." Hiccup deflated with a snort. For now he scraped his fingernails down the table pensively. "I always knew he was trouble. He always had this traitorous look in his eye." Olaf gasped. Chief. He has this evil look in his eye and I don't like it. Hiccup insisted as if he hadn't heard the boy's father's protest. You know, it could be worse. Olaf reminded him. My Aud had her first kiss at 7. Well, she didn't marry him, did she? Hiccup gazed at Olaf with wide eyes. Of course not. Olaf shook his head and Hiccup sighed in relief. At least not until this summer. What? Hiccup's hand slammed into the table in his horror. Olaf burst out laughing. Apparently you don't pay much attention at weddings, he guffawed. You married her and her husband last summer. Oh, right. Hiccup put a hand to his face to hopefully mask its bright red hue. Well, shut up. Olaf sighed with a mild chuckle. Sir, with all due respect, you're being ridiculous. Hiccup opened his mouth to argue and Olaf held up a hand. Eric would never touch her. Really? Hiccup immediately pointed to Eric, who was now carefully and slowly brushing Adriana's bangs out of her eyes. You know what I mean, Hiccup. Olaf shook his head. My boy would never do anything harmful to her. Over his dead body. Yeah, he raised Eric better than you raised Finn. Snotlout added with a derisive laugh. Ah, speaking which, Benen spoke up at last. I believe Eric and Adriana are a wonderful match indeed, but as far as Finn is concerned, there's no better match for him than with your daughter, Snotlout. Finn and Inga. Snotlout let out a laugh of disbelief. Yeah, maybe if they didn't hate each other. I think you mean Helga. Oh no, I mean Inga. Benen smiled at the Jorgensen girl, who was watching the dancing with a group of friends. She's stubborn, responsible, mature for her age, she would balance out Finn's flaws perfectly. Over my dead body. Snotlout snarled. If he as much as looks at her the wrong way, I will skin him alive. No need for drastic measures. Heather squeezed his arm. If it's meant to be, it'll be. It most certainly is not meant to be. Snotlout insisted in a loud voice. Relax, Lout, you're ruining the peace. Hiccup said with a grin. You're ruining the peace by allowing your spawn to take my daughter. What, spawn? Astrid gasped indignantly. He's not even trying anything. And he'd better keep it that way. Snotlout crossed his arms and glared at Finn from across the room. Oh, you don't have anything to worry about right now. Benen said serenely. He seems rather taken with the Ingerman girl. I'm just saying that it won't last. They are far too similar for their own good. Yeah, I can see how that might be a bit of a problem, come to think of it. Hiccup chortled. What do you know? Well, Snotlout, I think your family tree could benefit from a bit of Haddock blood. Shut up, you. Snotlout snarled. I suppose that would make our girls sisters, and us. I guess we'd be kind of like reverse cousins. Hiccup put an arm around his disgruntled friend. Being related to you in any way would be a fate worse than death. Snotlout struggled out from under Hiccup's arm. Oh, don't be like that, Snotlout. Astrid giggled. Is that any way to treat family? I said shut up. Snotlout bellowed. Don't let them get to you, sweetheart. Heather put her head on her husband's shoulder. Finn isn't even looking at Inga. You should be worried about this too. Snotlout hissed through his teeth. That boy is a menace, always has been. He's a perfect gentleman. Astrid retorted. You're the menace. As the argument between Astrid and Snotlout continued, Benen leaned over Hiccup so only he could hear him. Hiccup, I was wondering if I could have a moment of your time. Of course. Hiccup nodded. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, he added to Snotlout with a grin. The hooligan chief followed Benen across the hall to the large double doors. As soon as he and Benen were outside and the music was quiet enough to speak without shouting, the elderly man sighed. Is everything okay? Hiccup asked in a low voice. Oh yes. Benen nodded. I didn't mean to alarm you. I'm just wondering how to put this into words. He thought about it a few more seconds as Hiccup patiently waited. I went to the healers the other day. Apparently. Benen let out a chuckle and shook his head. Sorry, it's just a strange thing to be saying out loud. Apparently I'm dying. What? Hiccup gasped, suddenly finding himself unable to breathe properly. Dying. Oh no, it's not quite as bad as all that. Binnen put up a hand. I'm not going to drop dead sometime next week or anything. Mara tells me that my heart is getting weaker. I have to be careful what I do from now on. I could have months or years. But, dying. How? Hiccup slowly put his fingers through his hair. What about Finn? Binnen sighed deeply. Sometimes I think Finn forgets our difference in age. It's almost like he thinks I'll live forever. I see what you mean. Hiccup shook his head, his heart suddenly heavy. We're going to have to tell him. His throat constricted painfully. And Addy too. Binnen placed a hand on Hiccup's shoulder. It's a part of life. I'm an old man, Hiccup. I don't fear death. Nor do I dread it. Truth be told, I believe I would have died a long time ago if you and your people hadn't taken such excellent care of me. I was frail when you found me all those years ago. I didn't have much time left. But the time I've spent here has been the best years of my life. And I will be forever grateful. We're the ones who should be thanking you, Binnen. Hiccup smiled at his friend. You've brought so much joy into our lives. And we've needed that. He quickly hugged the older man and patted him on the back. Tonight isn't the time to tell the kids. Or Astrid, for that matter. But it's cold, so let's enjoy the rest of the party. Yes, let's. Binnen shivered and led Hiccup into the hall. Thanks for telling me. Hiccup whispered to him before spotting their friends still arguing several tables away. It was the perfect night. Absolutely perfect. Eric felt his heart pounding against his ribs when he finally took Adriana back onto the dance floor, and the two teenagers had danced until there were fewer hooligans packed into the great hall. He had hardly noticed the time passing at all until he became aware of several council members beginning to take down a few of the lights. Hey! Annie! Eric's heart nearly melted when he bright green eyes fixed on his. Can you hold on for just a second? The Haddock girl nodded, looking quite amused for some reason. Eric immediately bolted over to where Hiccup was standing and talking to Fish Legs. He bounced on his toes for a few seconds before timidly reaching forward and tapping his chief on the shoulder. Hiccup turned around and Eric saw a flash of something quite frightening for just a second. It disappeared a split second later, leaving the Larson boy to hope that it had just been a trick of the light. Chief, would it be alright if I... Eric cleared his throat rather loudly, his cheeks turning pink. If I walked Adriana home? Hiccup seemed to deflate. If you must, he nodded with a sigh. The boy distinctly heard laughter from the chief's friends as he walked back to the radiant girl with whom he had spent the whole evening. He nervously held out his hand and was relieved when she immediately took it without the slightest hesitation. Your dad says it's okay for me to walk you home, he said cheerfully. And walk you home I shall. Lead on, kind sir. Adriana said cheerfully. There was something special about walking through the great hall with a beautiful girl at his side. Even the girls who usually made fun of Adriana didn't have a single thing to say as the young couple walked past their group. As they made their way through the snow, they were silent for a few minutes, their hands tightly clasped and their eyes taking in the beautiful village square around them. They both loved how quiet it was whenever it snowed. It almost seemed a shame to break the potent silence around them. And so they walked without a word, allowing the tiny crunching sounds of their boots against the snow to permeate the still atmosphere. They seemed to arrive at the Haddock house far too soon. Eric turned to face his best friend, his heart skipping a beat at how red her cheeks and nose had become thanks to the cold. She was a beautiful sight indeed. I had a really great time tonight, he said softly, reaching up and brushing her stray bangs from in front of her sparkly green eyes. Me too. Adriana averted his gaze and stared at their clasped hands for a few seconds. It was different. Good different. Yes. Eric breathed a laugh. I think we have a lot to talk about. Adriana nodded. We do. Annie. Eric gently grasped her chin with his hand and raised it so that she was looking at him. I was wondering, do you want to go on a flight tomorrow afternoon? Charger or Lily, your pick. I'd like that. Adriana smiled up at him. For a moment, Eric hesitated. At the party, he knew he couldn't give in to temptation because there were people around. But Adriana was so beautiful in the glow of the multicolored Snoggletog lights. No one was around. It was just them, alone in the beautiful world they had created together, and Eric was feeling a little bit reckless. He leaned in and pressed his lips against hers, reveling in their softness once more. She gasped in surprise but quickly relished the warmth of his lips so much that she didn't stop to wonder how they had remained warm in this frigid weather. Her fingers slipped from his and reached up to stroke his cheek. For a few seconds, everything was perfect. Adriana's body was on fire, her head full of thoughts and feelings she'd never had before, all racing through it faster than she could process them. The moment ended far too soon. Eric and Adriana stared at each other, their reflections in each other's eyes silently begging for more, but now wasn't the time. The Haddock girl was tired and she knew he probably was too. So she allowed him to slowly move away from her, her fingers dropping from his cheek to her side. "Good night, Annie," Eric tenderly whispered before turning and walking in the direction of his house. Adriana watched him walk away for nearly a minute before she became suddenly aware of the fact that she was holding her breath. She exhaled so rapidly, she began to feel a bit lightheaded. But as she finally walked up to her house and slid in through the front door, she began to question everything rushing through her mind, especially the conclusion it all seemed to reach. Could she be? No. Well, maybe. The girl smiled at nothing in particular as she hung up her coat, her hands shaking the tiniest bit. She could feel heat rising to her face at the very thought, but it needed thinking all the same. A question soon began to burn in her mind, enveloping everything else in its wake: was this what it was like to fall in love? Chapter 6, Epidemic. Chapter text. Darkness. Warmth. Ultimate comfort. Deep sleep doesn't come often, but when it does, it's the most satisfying thing a person can experience. Nothing in the world is better than being burrowed under the covers, snuggled up beside your loved one. Bang. 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 Hiccup jerked violently, half sitting up on his arms to locate the disruptive sound. Toothless jerked from his rock bed and growled toward the downstairs. Astrid sharply inhaled at Hiccup's jerked movements and tried to sit up when the banging continued. "What?" Astrid asked groggily. That's when the shouting registered. "Chief! Chief Hiccup, help, we need you! Chief!" Hiccup tore off the covers and scrambled for his prosthetic and some clothes. Something was happening, something huge. Nobody came screaming for their chief in the wee hours of the morning for nothing. Within seconds Hiccup had thrown the door open and pounded down the stairs, the sound of his prosthetic slamming against the wood echoing through the quiet house. He charged to the front door and threw it open to reveal Eric. Eric sighed in relief, but fear was etched deeply into his face. "Chief," he began breathlessly, choking on air. Hiccup realized Charger was with Cigna for an early morning flight, so the boy had had to run all the way here from his house. We need help, the healer and the Gothi, somebody who can help, anyone. Eric. Hiccup rested his hands on the boy's shoulders and looked at him firmly. "Slow down. What's wrong?" Eric rubbed his forehead to try to calm down. Finally he looked back up at the chief and rasped, "It's my dad. He didn't feel well when they went home last night, so he went to bed early, but..." Eric swallowed thickly. He's had a fever all night and my mom said he'd be fine by morning, and then he started coughing and she sent me to get help but I didn't know who to." Hey, it's okay," Hiccup interrupted the distressed young man. "You were right to come to me. Is he still home?" Eric nodded and Hiccup pulled him inside. "All right, give me 30 seconds to change." Eric nodded and Hiccup turned to sprint up the stairs, blowing past Finn and Adriana standing in the middle of the stairs in confusion. To Astrid, who'd already quickly dressed, he commanded, "Go get Mara to the Larsens' house. Right now." Astrid nodded and tromped back down the stairs, snatched her coat off its hook and ran outside to the barn. Eric watched through the open door as she flew away on Stormfly, his heart pounding and throat tightly constricted. Eric. Eric jumped and turned to see Adriana standing at the bottom of the stairs. He vaguely noticed she was only wearing a nightdress, but worry caused him to ignore that fact. Adriana carefully stepped up to him as if he was a dangerous dragon. Wondering if he looked that freaked out, he cleared his throat and looked at his snow-covered boots. What's wrong? Eric swallowed thickly again. My dad's sick. He sighed heavily, looking back out the door as Toothless ran down the stairs and began pawing at the snow outside irritably. I don't know what's wrong. I'm sure everything's okay. Adriana moved to wrap her arms around him, but Eric jerked back and stepped away from her. No, don't touch me. Eric's teal eyes widened suddenly and he stepped away from Finn on his other side. What if whatever he has is contagious? Gods, what if I get US? Let's not go assuming things, buddy. Hiccup said as he tramped noisily back down the stairs. It's probably just a common sickness. Come on, we'll go talk to Mara. You two stay here. But I want to come. Adriana argued. Hiccup watched Eric nearly run outside before turning to his two kids. No, because if this is something serious, I won't risk you two getting sick. It's still early, besides, stay here, get something to eat, wake up a bit. Treat it as a normal day. Well, it's not every day another teen comes pounding on our door at 5 am, Dad. Finn raised an eyebrow. Hiccup sighed, please, just do as I say. I have to help Eric now. I won't force you to do anything, but I trust you both enough to do as I ask. So please, until further notice, just stay away from the Larsons. All right. Finn nodded immediately, not too keen on the idea of getting sick. Adriana frowned pitifully at her bare toes before Hiccup lifted her chin with a single finger to raise a questioning eyebrow at her. She finally sighed, okay. Thank you. Hiccup kissed his daughter's forehead before tugging some gloves over his hands. I'll send you word once we know what's going on. With that he ran outside and jumped into his saddle. The Haddock twins watched him offer a hand to Eric, who almost nervously took it and climbed on Toothless' back behind the chief. With a strong gust of wind from Toothless' wings, the Haddock household shrank below them. The village loomed closer within seconds, and from the corner of his eye, Hiccup could already see Astrid and Stormfly heading to the Larsons' home from the direction of the healers. Hiccup set his jaw as Eric's house loomed closer, and he hoped and prayed that whatever Olaf had wasn't too serious. Finn ground his teeth together impatiently, his head in his hands as he stared at the tabletop. He prayed to every god he could think of for mercy from this ultimate torture, this inexpressible torment. By the gods' good graces, can just sit down. He finally griped to his sister, whose pacing was driving him absolutely bonkers. You're stressing me out. It's been 4 hours. Adriana cried from the window. What do you want me to do? I think I just stated what I want you to do very clearly. Or did you not hear me? Oh, I'm sorry if I can't just sit still when things fall apart. Things aren't falling apart. Stop blowing things out of proportion all the time. Finn rolled his eyes. It's just a winter sickness, nothing Dad can't fix. Have a little faith. And you should stop being so overly confident. Who's to say it's some simple sickness? Adriana shot back. This is Olaf Larson we're talking about. We've known his since we were toddlers. Heck, he's been a good friend to Mom and Dad for years, even sat with them at the same table yesterday. Or can you not remember all the way back to yesterday? Finn growled low in his throat, arching backwards in his chair and nearly clawing at his eyes. Gods, you're so annoying. And you're a selfish brat. Selfish? Who are you calling selfish? The only obnoxious hothead in the room at the moment. And you're the over-emotional, gullible, cheeky blonde that can't just act normal. That's right, eat my dirt. Finn smirked. Careful, Finn, Adriana smirked back. Snot is not becoming. Finn flushed angrily, but a loud screech interrupted him. A terrible terror crawled through a messenger opening with a small piece of paper tied to its ankle. Finn jumped from his chair and tried to snatch up the dragon, but it growled at his aggression and crawled up Adriana's leg. She smiled at him smugly and untied the note. Finn crossed his arms in annoyance, making a face at the preening dragon. Adriana's face fell and she looked up at him, his own malicious expression fading. She turned the note around for him to see and aloud, he read. Come to the Great Hall immediately. Dad. Finn looked up at his sister from the note and wordlessly, they made their way to the door, terrible terror in tow. They jogged to the barn and instantly saddled up, not even taking the time to greet their dragons or pet their snouts. If their dad told them to come to the Great Hall without further explanation, then surely something bad was happening. Less than 5 minutes later, they landed at the top of the stairs and ran inside the hall. And what they saw stopped them in their tracks. Most of the tables in the Great Hall had been moved to one side of the hall, nearly emptying the other side. And on the empty side were a series of cots and makeshift beds along the cobblestone floor. Hiccup and Astrid were standing toward the center fire pit, talking to council members. The word sickness and unknown wafted toward them, but neither teenager could properly discern what their father was saying. The Larsen family was there with Olaf lying on a bed toward the back. Adriana made a move toward them, but Finn suddenly caught her arm, his eyes firm on the closest bed to them. Mara, the village healer, and Elder Gothi were attending to one woman in particular that made Adriana's heart leap. Svala. Adriana stepped forward. Svala Thorsten, she was newly pregnant. She couldn't be sick. Her usually golden skin was pale and sweaty while Tufnut sat the opposite side of the elder and healer, holding his wife's hand. Adriana couldn't stand the sight as she ran forward. Svala. Hiccup stepped between her and the sanctioned area, effortless blocking her view. Addy, hold on. Sweetie. Finn. He sighed slowly and looked each of them in the eyes. This is more serious than we hoped. Hiccup cast a long, worried look around the hall for a moment. Your mom told me that Mara couldn't come to the Larsens because a few others had come to her around the same time. Mostly adults, there's one teenager. Who? Adriana demanded instantly. Hiccup watched her carefully. Taryn. Addy's eyes widened and Finn gawked at him. What? No, she was fine last night, she was sitting at our table. Finn. Hiccup rested a hand on his shoulder. I don't have answers. Mara and the elder don't know what it is yet. But this area is now quarantined. From here on out, until this sickness is gone, no one can come near those who are sick. What about Eric? Is he sick? Adriana asked impatiently. Hiccup sighed. Not as of right now, but he won't leave Olaf's side. Can you blame him? But what if he gets sick? Addy, if I got this and was laid down on a mat, would you leave my side despite the risks? Adriana remained silent and Hiccup gently pulled her to his side. I don't blame him. Mara said he could stay, as could his mother, but she'd have to keep a close eye on them. Finn quietly asked, so if this is quarantined, why did you call us here? Because I need both of you to do me a favor. Hiccup turned to both of them again. People usually come here for meals. We need everyone to know that they cannot, under any circumstances, come in. We need to prevent the spread of this sickness as much as possible. What if we've already been exposed? Finn asked impatiently. A sharp poke of a staff at his hip made him jerk and the elder yanked him down by the collar. She opened Finn's mouth and stuck her tongue out at him. Finn raised an eyebrow and Hiccup said, stick out your tongue. Finn complied and within seconds, the elder waved him off. Good, you're clear for now. Addy. The Gothi checked her next and she too was healthy. Then the elder turned a wary eye up at the chief. Gothi, I'm Fr. The twins snickered as the small elderly woman nearly yanked their tall father to his knees and also checked his throat. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Finn smirked. The Gothi poked her fist in Finn's face in mock disapproval. Adriana turned to Hiccup curiously. What's she looking for? Hiccup eyed the Gothi curiously. We think the first signs are fever and white spots on the tongue. That seems to be what everyone has. Do we know what the sickness is? Elder Gothi groaned low in her throat and walked away, seemingly irritated, though they assumed her frustration wasn't with them. Hiccup sighed as he watched her return to Svala. No. We don't. What about a cure? Listen, Hiccup interrupted. I just need you two to fly around the village and tell as many as possible to stay home and only to come to the Great Hall if they need to see Mara. Can you guys do that for me? Finn shrugged. Then what? Hiccup chewed his lip pensively, having a mental conversation with Horst from across the room. We'll need to call a meeting. Also, I hate to load all of this onto you two, but can you also tell people to meet at the village square at 11? We need to tell everyone what's going on. Finn nodded resolutely. Don't go to the Great Hall unless you're super sick. Meet at Village Square at 11. Got it. Adriana followed her brother outside the hall doors and climbed into Lily's saddle. She turned just in time to hear her dad call, "And don't touch anything," just before they took off toward the village. In their entire lives, for as long as they could remember, the Haddock twins had never seen the village in such disarray, panic and chaos. However, they'd also never seen their father take charge over a panicked crowd before, and they were honestly impressed with his calm demeanor. Both Gobber and